Some discoveries refuse to stay buried. They wait, beneath ice, stone and sand, until the earth itself reveals them again. From a child buried with dogs, to idols sealed in fire and ice, every find carries a whisper from another world. Archaeologists call them artifacts, but what if they're messages left for us to find when we were finally ready to listen? Because the deeper we dig, the stranger the truth becomes, and maybe the past never really vanished. It's just waiting for someone to remember. The skeleton found hugging a child. In the quiet soil of northern Italy, archaeologists uncovered something that stopped every hand, every whisper, every sound in the trench. Beneath layers of time, sealed beneath the hardened earth of a Neolithic burial site, they found two skeletons, one small, fragile, unmistakably that of a child, and another, older, whose arms were wrapped protectively around it. They called it the Lovers of Valdaro, at first, until they realized this was not romance. It was something far older, far sadder. A moment of farewell, captured in bone and dust, locked in the earth for nearly 7,000 years. The adult skeleton appears to have curved inward at the moment of death, arms encircling the child's small frame. The child's skull rests against the hollow of the adult's shoulder, a posture so intimate, so deliberate, that even seasoned archaeologists hesitated before disturbing it. In their bones, traces of sorrow still linger. This wasn't a hasty grave. It was an act of love, performed in a world where survival left little time for sentiment. And yet, even then, humanity found room for tenderness. The soil around them tells the rest of the story. Small shards of pottery, fragments of ochre, remnants of tools carved from bone and flint. These were the signs of a small Neolithic community, living between forests and rivers, long before writing, before kingdoms, before history began. And yet, in this burial, they left behind something words could never say. The adult, possibly a mother, had likely died with the child, perhaps from disease, or famine, or a cold that swept through the valley. The chemical traces in the soil suggest they were buried together intentionally, side by side, the adult's arms positioned purposefully. Someone took care to arrange them this way. Someone grieved. For archaeologists, this was more than a find. It was a conversation with the past, one that whispered through millennia. When the sunlight first touched those bones again, the room where the discovery was displayed fell silent. People didn't look at it as an artifact. They looked at it as a mirror, because beneath the weight of time and dust, what they saw wasn't ancient at all. It was something human. The gesture of protection, the quiet defiance of death. Carbon dating places, the burial around 5000 BCE, a time when the first farming communities were taking root across Europe, when humans still lived close to the elements, and life expectancy rarely reached 40 years. These people had no temples, no scriptures, no written prayers, but in this grave they performed a ritual as sacred as any religion that would follow, the promise that love would endure, even when breath did not. As the excavation continued, researchers found traces of red pigment beneath the bones, ochre, used in ancient burial customs as a symbol of blood, of life returning to the earth. To coat the dead in red was to promise renewal, to hope that their essence would live on in the soil, in the wind, in the cycle of seasons. Perhaps this was the reason for the pose, not only protection, but passage. A mother guiding her child into the next world. But mysteries linger. There were no signs of violence, no grave goods indicating rank or wealth, just silence. Just two figures, their final embrace frozen in time. What disease struck them down? Why were they buried together? Was it accident, or ritual, or grief too deep to separate? These are questions science cannot yet answer. All it can do is measure calcium, trace isotopes, analyze soil samples, and yet still, the most powerful truth remains the simplest. Even in prehistory, love left a mark strong enough to outlast civilizations. Under magnification, the bones tell their own story. Microscopic grooves reveal a lifetime of strain. The adult worked with tools, carried weight, perhaps gathered, perhaps built. The child's bones, smaller and less worn, show signs of illness, likely frail from birth. Together they represent the fragility of early life, and the enduring will to nurture, to hold on, even when everything else was slipping away. Today replicas of this burial are displayed quietly in Italian museums, while the originals rest in climate-controlled darkness, preserved, studied, and still deeply mourned. Visitors often stand in front of the exhibit longer than any other. They don't look at the bones, they look at the space between them, that fragile gap filled with meaning. That silent message that crossed 7 millennia, that love, even in the age of stone, was already eternal. And so when night falls, and the ancient earth breathes quietly around what remains, the image of the skeleton still lingers in the imagination, the adult's arms encircling the child, as if time itself paused to witness a final act of protection. In that stillness lies something that no carbon date, no theory, no discovery can ever quite explain, that beneath the cold soil of prehistory, the heart of humanity was already beating. The city discovered by earthquake cracks. Sometimes the earth keeps its secrets by holding them tight, and sometimes it reveals them by tearing itself apart. In the highlands of western Turkey, in a quiet valley surrounded by olive groves and fractured hills, the ground began to shake one spring morning. A mild earthquake rippled through the landscape, nothing unusual in this region, where ancient fault lines crisscross like veins beneath the soil. But when the shaking stopped, something extraordinary appeared. From the opened cracks of the earth, stone emerged, not random debris, but walls, columns, and the edges of forgotten streets. What the tremor had exposed was not just broken rock, it was a buried city, a place called Izanoi, once radiant with marble, trade, and temples, and now awakened after centuries of silence. The story of Izanoi begins more than 2,000 years ago, during the Hellenistic Age, when Greek settlers carved their homes along the Penkalis River. Over time, it became a thriving Roman city, a miniature Rome, complete with theaters, baths, markets, and a temple dedicated to Zeus himself. Coins minted here bore imperial faces, its roads linked to the great trade arteries of Anatolia, and travelers once called it the city of sacred marble. But history can be cruel to beauty. The earth shifted, rivers changed their course, and one by one, the people drifted away. By the Middle Ages, Izanoi was gone, swallowed by floods, mud, and time. For nearly a millennium, it lay buried beneath farmland, its name reduced to whispers and dust. And then came the earthquake. Locals noticed the ground near the village of Çavdarhisar had cracked wide open. Beneath the fissures were patterns, blocks too even, shapes too perfect to be natural. Archaeologists arrived, cautious at first, and when they began to dig, the soil gave up its story layer by layer. What emerged was astonishing. Massive stone columns, still upright, despite centuries underground, fragments of mosaics that shimmered when washed clean, and beneath one slope, the carved facade of a once grand marketplace, the Macellum of Izanoi. Inscribed upon its stones were Latin words from Emperor Diocletian's edict on maximum prices, a law that once governed trade across the empire. It was as if a snapshot of the Roman economy had been locked inside the earth, preserved by disaster and rediscovered by chance. Further excavation revealed something even more haunting. A massive temple complex, partly intact, dedicated to Zeus. Its tall Corinthian columns, still standing, pierced the Anatolian sky. The temple's subterranean chamber, long hidden, was uncovered beneath layers of hardened soil and earthquake debris. Inside, the air smelled of minerals and old silence. Archaeologists found altars, fragments of statues, and curious carvings, signs that the temple had been used for centuries, even after the fall of Rome, by Christians, pagans, and perhaps others whose faiths have no surviving name. Each age had left its mark upon the same stone, turning the temple into a layered record of belief. And yet, perhaps the most mysterious discovery lay below the temple itself, a network of corridors and hidden chambers that seemed to serve no clear purpose. Some believe they were storerooms, others say they were ritual spaces used for ceremonies invoking the earth's power. After all, this city was built along fault lines. The ground beneath Izanoi was alive, trembling even in antiquity. It's possible the ancients knew this, that they worshipped the forces below, not only for fear, but for awe. To them, the earth wasn't just soil, it was a breathing god. As excavations expanded, the archaeologists uncovered a theater that once held 15,000 people, still shaped perfectly to carry a whisper across its tiers. Nearby stood the remains of a stadium where gladiators once fought, where cheers once thundered across marble seats. Now, only the wind moves there, carrying the soft cry of doves and the echo of footsteps from a world long gone. Each artifact, each pottery shard, coin, or fragment of sculpture tells a small story of a baker, a merchant, a child chasing sunlight through stone streets. But the true wonder of Izanoi isn't only what was found, it's how it was found. Not through human intent, but by the earth itself. Every few generations the fault lines shift, splitting the surface and revealing fragments of walls or foundations that had been buried deeper than memory. It's as though the planet itself refuses to forget what it once built, pushing its creations back toward the light. Archaeologists sometimes say that Izanoi is a city that breathes with the rhythm of the ground. It disappears into the soil and resurfaces through tremors, never truly gone, only sleeping. One of the most haunting moments came when ground-penetrating radar revealed an entire district still entombed, streets, doorways, and colonnades, preserved as if the inhabitants had just stepped away. Earthquakes had cracked the surface, but beneath those fissures lay an intact ghost city waiting for air. The first time sunlight entered those chambers again, it illuminated pottery still resting on shelves, mosaic floors depicting mythic beasts, and inscriptions to forgotten deities. The archaeologists called it a whisper from the underworld of history. For modern visitors, standing among the ruins of Aizanoi feels like walking through the echo of time itself. The temple stands half buried, half risen, framed by olive trees and hills. When the wind passes through its columns, it produces a soft low hum, a sound that seems almost deliberate, almost musical, as if the stones themselves remember. It's easy to imagine the people who once prayed here, looking to the sky for mercy while the ground trembled beneath their feet. Today, the rediscovery of Aizanoi is considered one of the most significant archaeological revelations in recent Turkish history. The earthquake that once threatened to destroy lives became, centuries later, the reason those lives were remembered. From tragedy came revelation. The city that vanished in silence returned in tremors, and as the excavations continue, each new shift in the ground seems to uncover more. New walls, new inscriptions, new questions. Why was Aizanoi abandoned so completely? Why did no record of its fall survive? And what else might still lie below, waiting for the next whisper of movement to open the earth once again? Perhaps this is the deeper story of Aizanoi, not just the ruins but the relationship between creation and collapse, between time and memory. The earth may destroy what we build, but sometimes, in its own unpredictable way, it also gives it back. And in those moments, in the shudder of the soil, in the sound of cracking stone, it reminds us that even beneath our feet, history is alive, shifting and waiting to be found again. The idol found inside a tree trunk. In the mist-covered forests of northern Guatemala, there are trees older than memory, roots gripping stone, trunks grown around the bones of vanished civilizations. For centuries, travelers have told stories about strange sounds in these jungles, faint humming, like wind through hollow wood, echoing where no one should be. It was deep in this forgotten wilderness, near the ruins of an unrecorded Mayan settlement, that loggers made a discovery unlike anything archaeologists had ever seen, a discovery hidden inside the heart of a petrified tree. What they found wasn't wood, or metal, or even bone, it was an idol, carved by human hands, locked within a fossilized trunk for what might have been thousands of years. The story begins in the early 2000s when a small team of forest workers were clearing a dense patch of growth near the Petén Basin, a region already famous for its hidden temples and sunken cities. One of the men struck something unusually hard, expecting rock. He cut deeper, and the sound changed, not dull like stone, but resonant, hollow, almost metallic. When they peeled away the outer bark, what appeared wasn't a normal tree, it was fossilized, a petrified trunk, its surface smooth and glass-like, with a deep crack running down the center. Inside that split, gleaming faintly in the shadow, was something sculpted, a shape that didn't belong to nature. They called the local authorities, and soon, a team of archaeologists arrived, hiking through miles of green silence to see it for themselves. What they uncovered over the next weeks would blur the line between geology and archaeology. Within that ancient trunk, once a living tree, now turned entirely to stone, lay the carved image of a human figure, kneeling, its hands raised as if offering something unseen. Its surface was dark, polished smooth, and the features were eerily intact, a narrow face, elongated eyes, and a crown-like band around the forehead. Tests showed the figure itself wasn't stone at all, but made of a strange composite, a mix of resin, ash, and metallic flecks, something that didn't match any known Mayan material. Even more mysterious, the petrified wood surrounding it had sealed perfectly around the idol, as though the tree had grown over it, and then over ages fossilized, preserving the sculpture like an insect in amber. The question that followed was impossible. How could a human artifact end up inside a petrified tree? Trees don't grow over solid objects easily, and petrification takes millions of years. That paradox was enough to draw international attention. Researchers from Guatemala City, and later, from Europe, came to study the find. Carbon dating of nearby organic material suggested the outer wood was ancient, well over 50,000 years old, while the idol itself, based on residue analysis, seemed far younger, perhaps only 2,000 to 3,000 years old, corresponding to the late pre-classic Mayan period. Somehow, the two had fused, crossing tens of millennia. The local Mayan descendants had their own interpretation. They said the idol wasn't trapped, it was protected. According to oral legends passed down by forest elders, there was once a guardian spirit, a watcher of roots, who hid sacred relics inside living trees, so they could never be stolen. Some said these idols were vessels for knowledge, memory carved into material form. Others whispered that they were living offerings, objects placed within trees to ensure the spirits of the jungle and the dead remained in harmony. When the tree fossilized, they said, it sealed the offering forever, turning the act of ritual into eternal stone. The archaeologists tried to maintain objectivity, but even the data unsettled them. Microscopic scans showed the petrified wood had grown fibers around the idol's surface, indicating it truly was enveloped during the tree's living phase. But that should have been impossible given the age difference. A few physicists proposed that the petrification might not have been a slow natural process. but rather something accelerated, perhaps caused by a sudden mineral-rich flood or an unknown chemical reaction that fossilized the trunk rapidly. But that theory raised even more questions. What kind of event could mineralize an entire tree without destroying the object trapped inside it? Excavation continued carefully. As they cleared more of the trunk, they found faint carvings etched into the wood surrounding the idol, symbols resembling Mayan glyphs, but distorted, melted into the grain. Some matched real inscriptions from ceremonial sites near Tikal, others didn't correspond to any known script. One of them translated loosely as, "the tree that remembers." Beneath the idol's base, inside the hollow core of the fossil, lay a thin layer of white ash. Analysis revealed traces of human bone dust. The researchers began to suspect this wasn't a simple statue at all. It was a funerary idol, a container for the remains of someone or something important. Then came the most haunting discovery. As light passed through cracks in the petrified surface, the idol's resin seemed to refract faintly, glowing with a subtle inner sheen, not artificial light, but a strange optical effect, like trapped luminescence. Geologists confirmed that minerals inside the resin could hold light energy, re-emitting it slowly after exposure to the sun. In other words, the idol glowed at night, faintly, softly, a phenomenon that locals had noticed long before scientists did. To them, it wasn't science, it was spirit. The tree of the Watcher, they said, was alive again. When the statue was finally removed and placed in a controlled lab, every layer of its surface told a different story. Resin, from tropical trees, powdered volcanic glass, and traces of pigments not native to Guatemala at all, possibly traded from distant regions. It suggested a level of craftsmanship and ritual complexity unknown to historians for that period. Whoever made this idol didn't carve it for beauty, they carved it for purpose. Some researchers proposed it was meant to represent a deity linked to fertility and decay, a god who governed both growth and death, appropriate for an offering sealed within a tree. But others pointed to something even stranger. When digital imaging was applied to the idol's face, subtle patterns appeared beneath the surface, lines too precise to be random. When connected, they formed geometric sequences, spirals within spirals, almost like encoded diagrams. Some say it could have been a form of proto-writing, a way to embed ritual knowledge inside an image. Knowledge only visible to those who knew how to reveal it. The deeper the investigation went, the more the idol seemed to defy explanation. Every theory created another paradox. The skull with a hole that healed. In a small museum in southern France, beneath the soft yellow light of a glass case, rests a human skull that shouldn't exist. At least, not the way it does. The bone is ancient, its surface rough and pale with age. But what captures the eye is the wound. A clean circular opening carved into the crown of the skull, not the mark of violence, but of intention. What makes it more extraordinary is that around the edge of that hole, the bone has healed. Whoever this person was, they survived what can only be described as the world's first known brain surgery, a medical act carried out thousands of years before the birth of written language. This practice, known today as trepanation, has been found across the world, from the Andes to the plains of Europe, but some of the oldest and most successful examples come from Neolithic Europe, nearly 8,000 years ago. Imagine that world. Stone tools, no antiseptic, no anesthesia, and yet the knowledge, or perhaps the courage, to open a human skull with precision. To modern minds, it feels unthinkable, but to our ancestors, it was an act of healing, of ritual, and perhaps of faith. Archaeologists first encountered these trepan skulls in the 19th century. When the first was found in France, scholars assumed it must have been from battle, a blow that shattered the head. But soon they realized something stranger. The edges of the hole weren't jagged like from a wound, they were smooth, even, and carefully shaped. And more importantly, the bone had regrown slightly around the margins, proof that the person had lived for weeks, months, maybe years after the operation. Someone had cut into their skull, and they had survived. The oldest known cases were found in France, Ukraine, and parts of the Balkans, all dating to between 7,000 and 5,000 BCE. In one burial near Ensisheim, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a man with not one, but two trepanations, both showing healing. Another skull from Moravia displayed 5 separate openings, suggesting repeated operations over a lifetime. These weren't isolated accidents, they were part of a shared knowledge, passed down across generations. The question is, why? Some scientists believe these surgeries were performed to relieve pressure after head trauma, to drain fluid, or treat swelling from an injury. Others think it was spiritual, a way to release evil spirits believed to cause pain, seizures, or madness. In Neolithic art, the head often symbolized the soul. To cut into it may have been seen not as harm, but as liberation, freeing the inner life trapped within the bone. The process itself was astonishingly advanced. Using only stone tools, often made of flint or obsidian, practitioners scraped, drilled, or cut through the skull's outer layers with deliberate care, avoiding the dura mater beneath, the membrane protecting the brain. Evidence shows the edges were sometimes smoothed afterward, perhaps to aid healing or as a form of ritual closure. It required knowledge of anatomy, skill, and a steady hand, traits we associate with surgeons today, not prehistoric villagers, and yet the success rate was remarkable. Analysis of hundreds of skulls across Europe shows that nearly half of those operated on survived long enough for healing to begin. That means these early people not only understood how to perform trepanation, they understood how to keep a patient alive afterward. How did they manage pain, prevent infection? We may never fully know. Some speculate they used herbal sedatives, extracts from poppy, henbane or willow bark, natural sources of morphine and aspirin. Others believe smoke rituals and chanting played a role, soothing the body and spirit while the surgeon worked. In certain regions, trepanation became more than medicine, it became a kind of initiation. In the burial mounds of Central Europe, skull fragments removed from trepanations have been found worn as pendants. To carry a piece of one's own skull may have been a symbol of survival, or perhaps a connection to the divine. Some even suggest these fragments were believed to hold spiritual power, pieces of the human mind, hardened into talismans. In Ukraine, one burial revealed a young woman whose skull had been opened with remarkable precision, a perfect oval cut, edges rounded, no sign of violence. Her burial was careful, adorned with beads and ochre. Perhaps she was a healer herself, or a patient revered for surviving what few could. Nearby, fragments of animal skulls show similar holes, suggesting early humans practiced on animals first, testing their technique before working on one of their own. But the story of trepanation is not just about surgery, it's about what it says of us, that even in the dawn of civilization, humans were not afraid to face the unknown within themselves. They dared to open the head, the seat of consciousness, to treat pain, or to touch something sacred. In their eyes, the mind and the spirit were not separate. Healing the body meant healing the soul. Modern scientists have tried to replicate ancient trepanation techniques using flint tools on bone samples. They discovered it could be done in under an hour, using nothing but careful scraping, no violent blows, no drilling. The level of control was shocking, and under a microscope, the cut marks match perfectly with those found on real Neolithic skulls. These were not crude butchers, they were surgeons, the first in human history. Some skulls show signs that the procedure wasn't about healing injury at all. They belonged to healthy individuals with no trauma or disease visible. That suggests the operation may have had another meaning, perhaps ritual enlightenment, a way to open a gateway to visions or altered states of mind. In some regions, the skull's crown, the spot where trepanations are most common, aligns with what many later cultures called the third eye. Could this be coincidence, or a forgotten echo of ancient spiritual experimentation? And yet, for all the mystery, there's something deeply human in these bones. The careful cuts, the clean healing, the effort to preserve life, it all speaks of compassion and curiosity. Someone cared enough to try. Someone believed enough to risk. Someone, thousands of years ago, held another's head steady in trembling hands, and worked not to harm, but to heal. When you stand before one of these skulls, the city that had no streets, in the heart of southern Anatolia, where the plains stretch out beneath a vast and empty sky, lies a hill that was once alive. For centuries it was mistaken for a natural mound, a rise of wind-blown soil and stone. But beneath that quiet hill, archaeologists uncovered something no one expected, an ancient city, older than writing, older than the pyramids, and unlike anything else the world had ever seen. This was Çatalhöyük, a Neolithic settlement that flourished around 9,000 years ago, long before civilization was supposed to exist. A place where thousands of people lived together in close quarters, farming, creating art, and building homes side by side. But the strangest thing about it is what it didn't have. No streets, no paths, no open spaces. In Çatalhöyük there were no roads to walk on, no doors at ground level. The entire city was a continuous honeycomb of houses, pressed together so tightly that the rooftops became the only way to move from place to place. To enter your home, you didn't walk through a door, you climbed down through the roof. It was a world turned upside down, a civilization without streets. Each house at Çatalhöyük was built directly against the next, sharing walls with its neighbors. There were no alleys, no courtyards, no public squares. From above, the city looked like a seamless carpet of clay rooftops stretching to the horizon. People moved along these roofs, crossing from one dwelling to another, stepping over air vents and ladders, living their lives above the world they built. At dawn, smoke would rise through hundreds of rooftop holes, curling into the cold Anatolian air. Women ground grain on the floor inside dim rooms lit only by firelight. Children scrambled up ladders, chasing each other across the roofs, their footsteps echoing like soft drums. Beneath them, their families lived, cooked and slept, their entire world contained in square rooms of mud brick and plaster. Inside these homes, life was both simple and strange. The walls were painted with murals, scenes of bulls, hunters, and volcanoes erupting in red and black pigments. The floors were plastered smooth and polished until they shone. Beneath those floors lay the dead. When a family member died, their body was buried under the sleeping platform or the hearth. Over time, layer upon layer of burials built up beneath the living, ancestors literally forming the foundation of daily life. In some homes, skulls were removed and plastered, reshaped to look lifelike again, and kept on display, perhaps as a way to keep the dead close or to honor them as guardians of the household. Each family had its own tombs, its own silent conversation between the living and the dead. What kind of society could thrive in such a place? There were no palaces, no temples, no obvious leaders. Catalhuyuk had no hierarchy carved in stone. Archaeologists found no evidence of kings or priests, only homes, nearly identical, repeated hundreds of times. It seems everyone shared roughly the same way of life, the same tools, the same food, a society without streets, and perhaps without rulers. And yet there was art everywhere. On the walls of certain rooms, the same symbols appear again and again: hands, horns, leopards, vultures. One painting shows what may be the earliest map in human history, a plan of the settlement itself, with a volcano erupting nearby. Another shows men dancing with bulls, perhaps echoing rituals of fertility or strength. The walls tell of a people who dreamed, celebrated, and mourned together, but never wrote a single word. How did they organize such a city without streets, without leaders? One theory suggests that the rooftops served as both roads and meeting grounds. When the day began, families emerged onto the roofs to work, to trade, to talk. The rooftops connected everyone, a living network of paths in the sky. The ladders that descended into each home were not just entrances, they were boundaries. Inside, private life. Above, the shared world. The architecture of Catalhuyuk tells a quiet truth. Even at the dawn of civilization, humans already understood how to live close, dangerously close, without falling into chaos. Thousands of people stacked side by side, building and rebuilding their homes over the remains of the old, each new layer rising slightly higher than the last, until the city itself became a mound, a memory sealed in earth. When the settlement finally faded, it left behind 18 layers of occupation. 18 generations of people living in the same place, walking the same rooftops, burying their ancestors beneath the same floors. And then, silence. The city was abandoned. The roofs collapsed. Dust covered everything. For millennia, the wind erased it from memory, until modern archaeologists uncovered it in the 1960s. As they brushed away the soil, they realized they weren't looking at ruins of palaces or temples. They were looking at a miracle of everyday life. Ordinary people building an extraordinary city. Some researchers think the lack of streets wasn't accidental. The rooftops gave them protection. In a world filled with wild animals and hostile tribes, moving across the roofs kept danger away from their doors. The only way into your home was from above, through a narrow ladder hole that could be easily closed. It was security, privacy, and order, all without walls or weapons. Others believed the design was symbolic, that the roofs represented a connection between earth and sky. Life below was domestic, earthly; life above, communal and sacred. The act of climbing up to the roof may have carried ritual meaning, like stepping from the world of the living into the realm of the spirits. In the glow of firelight, you can imagine what it was like. Families gathered inside windowless rooms, the air thick with the scent of smoke and grain, the idol that was buried face down. In the dusty highlands of Peru, where the wind whispers through ancient ruins and the mountains keep secrets older than memory, a discovery was made that left archaeologists in silence. A small idol, carved by hands thousands of years ago, was found buried face down in the earth. It wasn't broken, it wasn't lost, it had been placed that way, intentionally, carefully, as if whoever buried it wanted it to never see the sky again. This is the story of the face-down idol of Peru, a forgotten relic from a civilization that believed even their gods could die. The discovery happened in a remote valley not far from the remains of Caral and Chavin, two of the earliest known civilizations in the Americas. Here, beneath layers of compacted soil and ash, a team of archaeologists uncovered what at first looked like an ordinary offering pit: fragments of pottery, animal bones, and a few shells. But at the center of it lay something different, a statue, carved from volcanic stone, dark and heavy, its surface smoothed by time. Its face was intricate, wide eyes, a stern mouth, and a crown-like headdress rising from its head. Yet what startled everyone was not its craftsmanship, but its position. It was lying face down, pressed into the earth as though in submission. Normally, idols in ancient Peru were buried upright, facing east, or seated toward the rising sun. That was how you honored a deity, by placing it in the direction of light, renewal, and rebirth. But this idol was facing the opposite way, toward darkness, toward the soil. Why? When the artifact was lifted and studied, researchers noticed signs of ritual deactivation, tiny fractures around the head and shoulders, deliberate strikes, not from damage or decay. Traces of pigment, red ochre and black soot, coated its back, as if it had been painted after being turned over. And most chilling of all, near the idol's mouth was a small stone plug, sealing it shut. It was as though the ancient people wanted to silence it forever. In Andean cosmology, idols weren't just symbols, they were believed to be alive. Each one carried the presence of a spirit, an apu, a mountain deity, a force that could bless or curse. To destroy or silence an idol wasn't an act of neglect, it was an act of control, a ritual killing. Archaeologists call this process idol deactivation, the ceremonial burial or disabling of a sacred object when its power became dangerous or when its spirit had to be put to rest. Imagine the moment, a gathering at dusk, the air thick with incense and the echo of drums. A small group of priests or shamans stands around the idol, once an object of worship, now fallen out of favor. Perhaps it had stopped bringing rain. Perhaps its temple was about to be abandoned, or maybe the people feared it had turned against them. They anoint it with ochre, speak words of farewell, and strike it gently, not to shatter it, but to close its eyes. Then in a solemn act, they lay it face down into the ground, so it would never again gaze upon the world of the living. As the soil covers it, the voices fade, and the idol disappears into darkness. Centuries pass, earthquake, erosion, time. And then, one day, sunlight finds it again. The symbolism of a face-down burial is powerful. In ancient Peruvian belief systems, orientation mattered. The sky represented the world of the living, the earth below, the underworld, the realm of ancestors and spirits. To place an idol face down was to send it back, returning it to the underworld from which its power came. It was not an act of hatred, but of balance. Some archaeologists compared it to the decommissioning of sacred spaces in Egypt or Mesopotamia, where priests would bury statues of gods when a temple fell out of use. But in Peru it seems more personal. The way the idol was placed, gently aligned, the soil pressed carefully around it. It wasn't destruction, it was a farewell. The people didn't forget their gods, they just learned when to let them sleep. When researchers analyzed the soil around the idol, they found fragments of burned maize, small bones of llamas, and crushed turquoise offerings. Even as the idol was buried, it was honored, and that duality, reverence and rejection, captures something deeply human. We build what we fear, we worship what we hope to understand, and sometimes when those things begin to feel too powerful, we turn them face down. The idol's features connect it to the early Chavin culture, dating back nearly 3,000 years. The Chavin were master stone carvers, their temples filled with fierce faces, half human and half animal, symbols of transformation. Many of their deities were linked to the jaguar, the serpent, and the condor, creatures that lived between worlds. In their worldview, power flowed through everything, but it had to be contained. Even divine energy could become dangerous if not balanced. So when an idol was buried, it wasn't forgotten, it was put to rest, like a sleeping god beneath the soil. When the archaeologists turned the idol over, sunlight hit its face for the first time in thousands of years. It stared back, empty eyes, silent mouth, as if still waiting for the next ceremony. Some of the researchers later said the moment felt unsettling, as though they were disturbing something that had already made peace with the earth. One of them quietly turned the idol back down again after documentation. There was no scientific reason, it just felt right. Today, the face-down idol rests in a museum storage room in Peru, wrapped in cloth, catalogued and labeled. But even there, it seems to carry weight, a presence that lingers. Visitors who've seen it describe a strange stillness around it, as if the air thickens when you approach. It's just stone, they remind themselves. But the ancients didn't believe in just stone. They believed in echoes, in energy, in memory. The idol that was buried face down is a reminder that even the oldest civilizations grappled with questions we still ask today. Where does power come from? What happens when we lose faith in what we once worshipped? And can something sacred ever truly die? Or does it simply turn away? As the Peruvian sun dips behind the mountains, the wind moves softly through the valley, the same wind that once carried chants and smoke. Somewhere beneath the soil, perhaps, there are others still sleeping, idols waiting with their faces pressed to the earth, their stories not yet uncovered. And if you listen closely, in that endless hush of time, you might almost hear it, a whisper from the ground, a god that learned to sleep. The tomb that was flooded on purpose. In the shifting sands of Egypt, where the Nile bends and ancient stones whisper of gods and kings, there lies a tomb unlike any other. It wasn't forgotten by time, or destroyed by flood. It was built to be drowned. Beneath layers of limestone and sand, archaeologists uncovered a sealed chamber filled not with air, but with water. Still, silent, untouched for thousands of years. Inside, statues stood half submerged, their reflections trembling on the liquid surface. Carvings glimmered faintly through the murk, as if the walls themselves were breathing beneath the flood, and at the center of it all, a sarcophagus, resting beneath a thin veil of water, as though the dead within had been offered to the river gods themselves. This wasn't an accident, it was a ritual. A deliberate act by those who believed that death was not an ending, but a crossing. When the tomb was first discovered, just west of ancient Thebes, researchers assumed it had been flooded by the Nile, perhaps a natural disaster, or centuries of groundwater seeping through the rock. But as they began to clear the passageways, something didn't fit. Every brick, every channel, every curve of the chamber was shaped to guide water in, not keep it out. The corridors sloped gently downward, ending in a pool that surrounded the burial chamber like a moat. Channels carved into the stone led directly from a now dry riverbed, once connected to a sacred canal, and on the walls were inscriptions, not prayers for protection, but for purification. Let the waters of Nun cleanse the vessel of life. May the flood bear the soul to the horizon. To the ancient Egyptians, water wasn't just an element, it was the source of creation, the body of the primeval god Nun, from which all things emerged at the dawn of time. To flood a tomb wasn't to destroy it, it was to return the dead to the cosmic waters, the beginning and the end. As the excavation continued, the archaeologists found the remains of carefully constructed stone gates, valves, almost, designed to control the water's entry. They were lined with a resin that kept them sealed for centuries. Inside the burial chamber, they discovered that even the walls had been coated with a thin layer of waterproof plaster, still smooth to the touch after thousands of years. It was unmistakable. This tomb was meant to hold water forever. But why, and for whom? The sarcophagus itself offered the first clue. It was made not of limestone or granite, but of a darker, denser material, basalt, polished to a mirror sheen, and etched into its lid was the symbol of the Ankh, the key of life, floating above wavy lines that represented the Nile. Beside it, faint hieroglyphs spoke of a high priest of Osiris, the god of resurrection, and the underworld. His name was lost to erosion, but his title remained, Keeper of the Waters of Life. That single phrase changed everything. Scholars began to piece together the ritual. At the time of burial, the chamber would have been sealed dry. Priests would perform the rites, songs, incense, invocations to Osiris and Nun. Then, when the final words were spoken, they would open the channels. Water from the sacred canal would flow in, surrounding the tomb, filling it slowly, as torches flickered in the rising dark. The priests would watch the sarcophagus vanish beneath the surface, the soul, they believed, now afloat on the river of eternity. The tomb would then be sealed forever, the entrance closed, the water trapped within. A perfect, eternal simulation of the primordial flood. It's hard to imagine the sight. A burial chamber filling with water, shimmering with torchlight and echoing with prayers, the sound of dripping, the smell of incense and damp stone, the moment when silence finally takes over and the surface grows still. The Egyptians believed this water connected the tomb to both worlds, the realm of the living, through the Nile above, and the realm of the dead, through the darkness below. To submerge the body was to dissolve it into divine creation, to let the soul travel not by land, but by current, to sail the waters of rebirth. In later centuries, Greek visitors to Egypt wrote of similar rites. The drowned tombs of Osiris, they called them, where initiates symbolically died in sacred pools before being reborn. These weren't mere myths. The tomb beneath Thebes showed that such practices may have been more literal than anyone imagined. Some even suggest the priest entombed here was part of an ancient mystery cult, one that believed the soul could merge with the Nile itself. Each drop of water in the chamber symbolized a fragment of the divine, reflecting both heaven and earth. In their theology, to rest beneath water was to lie within the body of God. When divers entered the chamber for the first time, the experience was haunting. The water was perfectly still, heavy with minerals, untouched by air for over 3,000 years. As their light swept across the walls, symbols emerged. Fish, boats, ripples, and the eternal spiral of the sun. At one corner, a small statue of Osiris stood chest deep in the flood, his arms crossed, his eyes gazing upward. It was as if he had been standing guard ever since, watching over the drowned dead. One diver described it later as like descending into someone's dream, one that had been sleeping for millennia. Tests revealed the water still carried traces of ancient resins and perfumes, ingredients used in purification rites. It wasn't ordinary flood water. It had been blessed, prepared, and guided. A sacred mixture, designed to preserve. Even the minerals in it seemed intentional, creating a natural preservative environment that had kept the chamber almost untouched. Inside the sarcophagus, the remains of the high priest were found remarkably intact, wrapped in layers of linen hardened by time and water. His amulets, tiny gold ankhs, scarabs, and lotus charms, still gleamed faintly in the light. On his chest was one final inscription: "May the flood never cease, for I am carried in its arms." The symbolism is breathtaking. To most of us, water means decay. To them, it meant eternity. Every droplet inside that tomb was a prayer, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. It was as if the Egyptians had built not just a grave, but a miniature universe, where the soul would forever drift between creation and rest. In a sense, they recreated the very moment of Genesis, the first rising of land from the flood, within a single hidden chamber. Today the site is sealed again, to preserve what remains. But the discovery reshaped how historians understand Egyptian spirituality. It revealed that death, to them, wasn't about isolation, it was about immersion. Becoming part of something vast, something fluid, something eternal. Even the pharaohs, buried in their dry tombs of gold, sought eternal life through the sun and sky. But this priest, this unknown keeper of the waters, sought it through the depths. He didn't want to rise, he wanted to flow. As the lights dim in the halls of the museum where fragments of his tomb are displayed, the reflections still ripple faintly across the walls, like water remembering its path. And if you listen in that silence, perhaps you can still hear it, the slow, eternal echo of a flooded tomb, where death wasn't feared, but revered, where eternity wasn't written in stone, but whispered in the sound of water. The mask that was sewn into skin. In the endless white silence of northern Siberia, where the wind never rests and the ground remains frozen even in summer, archaeologists uncovered a burial that defied everything they thought they knew about ancient death rituals. Deep beneath the permafrost, inside a grave preserved for over 3 millennia, they found the body of a man whose face was not covered with cloth or paint, but with metal, a thin copper mask that had been carefully and deliberately stitched into his skin. It wasn't decoration, nor armor, nor jewelry. It was something else entirely. A ritual so intimate, so haunting, that even hardened excavators fell silent when they realized what they were looking at. The copper wasn't simply resting on the skull, it was attached, fused, threaded through the flesh itself. Tiny puncture marks along the jaw, the temples, and the eyelids showed where fibers once passed through, binding metal to skin in a ceremony that blurred the boundary between the human and the inhuman. The body was discovered near the Yamal Peninsula, in one of the most remote and unforgiving landscapes on Earth. The cold had preserved everything, from strands of hair to fragments of woven plant fibers, still connecting the edges of the mask to what was once living tissue. Around the man's head lay tools carved from bone, teeth of reindeer strung into necklaces, and a crescent-shaped copper pendant resting on his chest. Each object seemed to carry meaning, placed with precision as though part of a spiritual equation known only to those who buried him. When scientists examined the copper, they realized it had come from the distant Ural Mountains, hundreds of miles away, an immense distance for prehistoric travelers to carry heavy sheets of metal. That meant the material was sacred, brought deliberately for a purpose that went far beyond burial. To the ancient people of Siberia, copper was alive. It wasn't just a metal, it was a spirit, something that breathed, resonated, and could guard the soul. They believed the world was filled with unseen forces, the cold spirits of the tundra, the watchful ancestors, and the restless dead. Metal in their cosmology was a shield against corruption and decay, a way to preserve the essence of the person long after the body was gone. Sewing the copper directly into the flesh wasn't about cruelty or punishment. It was a transformation ritual. They weren't hiding the dead, they were reforging them, turning mortal flesh into something eternal. The man beneath that mask was not meant to rot or fade, he was meant to endure, half flesh and half metal, preserved between worlds. When modern researchers reconstructed the skull beneath the mask, they found that the mouth was gently closed, the head tilted slightly upward, as though the man had died in peace. The mask, shaped with delicate hammer marks, followed the contours of the face perfectly, smooth brow, defined cheekbones, and a faint suggestion of lips. This wasn't a crude covering, it was crafted with care, intention, and reverence. The copper itself had chemically reacted with the bone beneath it over thousands of years, fusing the two into one composite form. In a literal sense, man and metal had become inseparable. That detail astonished scientists. It meant that what the ancients sought through ritual had actually happened. They had created permanence. Among the artifacts buried with him were antler tools, fragments of animal hide, and traces of ochre pigment, symbols often used in Siberian shamanic rites. These objects weren't random. Each represented an element of existence. Bone for life, ochre for blood, copper for transformation. Taken together, they formed a map of passage, guiding the soul across the invisible boundary between life and death. Nearby graves showed similar patterns, bodies laid carefully, some with partial masks or copper sheets over their eyes and mouths. It became clear that this wasn't a single anomaly but part of a broader belief system that saw death as a process of merging, the dissolution of the human form into elemental essence. In ancient northern myth, it was said that the earth remembers those who give themselves fully to it. Perhaps this man's people believed that by sewing metal into his face, they were allowing the land itself to claim him, not in decay but in transformation. When he returned to the soil, his flesh would fade, but the copper would remain, glowing faintly in the dark, a marker of immortality. Even now, when excavators open the burial chamber and light strikes the mask, it reflects a dull greenish gleam, as though the face beneath is still watching. The burial also tells a story of connection, of how early human cultures saw no division between body and spirit, between matter and meaning. In our modern eyes, sewing metal into skin feels macabre, but to them it was sacred craftsmanship, a merging of body and belief. The act of stitching the copper was an act of care, not violence. It required patience, ceremony, and faith. Faith that what they were creating was not a corpse, but a vessel strong enough to carry a soul into eternity. When scientists finally reburied the remains for protection, they left the mask intact. No one dared to separate it from the skull. One archaeologist said quietly, "It feels alive." That feeling, that unease, wasn't superstition, it was recognition. Recognition that something in that grave still holds a pulse of purpose, a resonance across time. The mask was not merely an artifact, it was a statement carved into history that humans, even in the harshest corners of the world, never stopped seeking ways to outlast death. As the Siberian winds howl across the tundra and the frost creeps over the buried tomb once again, the copper-faced man lies in silence beneath the ice, his transformation complete. And maybe, somewhere in that frozen dark, the ancient belief still hums softly, that through metal, through ritual, through the merging of flesh and earth, a soul can find its way back to eternity. The child buried with 142 dogs. In the sun-bleached sands of ancient Egypt, far from the royal tombs and the monuments of pharaohs, a burial was uncovered that silenced an entire excavation team. It was not a noble's tomb, nor a warrior's grave, but the resting place of a small child, no older than 9. Around the fragile bones of that child lay the remains of 142 dogs, carefully arranged in a ring that encircled the body like a living wall of guardianship. The desert had preserved the scene in exquisite stillness, as if time itself had chosen not to disturb this strange and tender mystery. At first, the archaeologists thought it must be a mass animal sacrifice, a ritual slaughter offered to appease a forgotten god. But as they brushed away centuries of sand, they began to notice the order, the deliberate placement of each animal, the way the heads pointed inward, their spines curving protectively around the small human form at the center. These weren't random bones, it was a pattern, a design. Someone had planned this burial with care, intention, and meaning, and that meaning seemed to revolve entirely around the child. The site was located near Saqqara, the necropolis that once served Memphis, the beating heart of ancient Egypt. Yet this grave stood apart from royal architecture or temple complexes. It was humbler, quieter, dug into a slope overlooking the desert, where the wind whispered endlessly across the dunes. Within the burial chamber, archaeologists found traces of cloth and tiny wooden toys beside the child's remains. The body was laid out gently, wrapped in linen that had long since turned to dust. Around the head were fragments of reeds, possibly once forming a pillow. Whoever buried this child did so with love. But why the dogs? Ancient Egypt revered animals, and none more faithfully than the dog. In life they were protectors, hunters, companions. In death, they were sacred messengers. To the Egyptians, dogs were not merely animals, they were extensions of the divine, linked to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the afterlife. It was Anubis who guided souls through the darkness, who stood at the scales of judgment and weighed the heart against the feather of truth. Perhaps this burial wasn't tragedy, but ceremony. The child entrusted to the guardians of Anubis, shielded by them in death as in life. Many of the dog skeletons showed no sign of violence. Their positions suggested they were placed there after natural death, not sacrificed. Some bore collars made of twisted fibers, evidence that they were once cared for, perhaps even loved. Others were older, their bones weathered, as if collected from earlier burials. This meant that the dogs may have been chosen for who they were, not as offerings but as companions. It was as though the child's family had gathered generations of loyal guardians, bringing them together to form one final circle of protection. But the scale of it, 142, was staggering. No known burial in Egypt or anywhere else on Earth had shown this level of devotion between human and animal. It forced scientists to reconsider what the ancient Egyptians believed about spirit and bond. In their mythology, the boundary between life and death was porous, and souls could be guided, accompanied, and even guarded by sacred beings. The dogs may have been chosen to guide the child safely into the field of reeds, the eternal paradise where loved ones reunited beneath endless blue skies. Radiocarbon dating placed the burial around 500 BCE, a time of social unrest and shifting religious identities in Egypt. The priests of Anubis still held power, but new cults were rising, those of Isis, Bastet, and Osiris. This was an age when faith blended and transformed, when local traditions merged with great temple rites. Perhaps the burial of the child reflected a regional custom, one that valued animal guardianship as a form of divine escort. To these ancient people, love did not end with death. It evolved, deepened, and crossed into eternity. The bones told another story too. The child's small frame bore signs of malnutrition and fever. The archaeologists concluded that the child had likely died from illness, not accident or violence. Around the wrists and ankles were faint traces of copper oxide, the ghost of metal bracelets now long gone. The jewelry indicated affection and care, a farewell gift from those left behind. It is possible that the dogs had been this child's life companions, living creatures that slept beside them, followed them through dusty courtyards, and watched over them in the desert night. And when the child died, the family may have believed that their spirits should never be separated. To stand in that burial chamber was to feel a presence that defied explanation, an aura not of death, but of devotion. Even the lead excavator, a seasoned archaeologist with decades of field experience, later said that it felt less like a grave and more like a story, frozen in sand, a story of love so powerful that it demanded physical expression. The way the dogs were positioned around the body resembled the petals of a flower closing around its center. The child, the heart of that flower, lay at peace, untouched by time. In the mythology of Anubis, it is said that the god listens for the sound of loyalty, the invisible bond between the living and the dead. Perhaps this is what the ancient family hoped for, that by surrounding their child with 142 loyal guardians, Anubis himself would hear the call and guide the young soul safely into the light. And maybe that's why, after thousands of years, the scene still speaks, because it touches something primal within us. The understanding that love, in its purest form, is not limited by breath or heartbeat. It endures, taking shapes we can barely comprehend. Today the remains rest in a museum archive, carefully catalogued and preserved. The dogs are laid out once again in their protective circle, the child at the center, just as they were found. When researchers dim the lights and only the lamps illuminate the bones, it feels as though the pack has returned to life, a silent, eternal watch over the one they refused to leave behind. The sands of Egypt hold countless mysteries, but few are as moving as this. A child who was never left alone, a family that defied mortality itself, and a circle of guardians whose loyalty stretched beyond time. It is a reminder that even in a civilization defined by kings and gods, the simplest bond between a child and their companions was powerful enough to be immortalized in stone, sand, and memory. And so, beneath the eternal desert sky, the child and the dogs still sleep together, united, untouched, and infinite, proof that in the end, love was Egypt's greatest monument of all. The skull with a gold-plated face. In the green hills of ancient Thrace, where fog drifts through forgotten valleys and the earth still hides the echoes of lost empires, archaeologists uncovered a burial that felt more legend than truth. It began with the glint of gold, just a shimmer beneath the soil, a reflection of sunlight that led to one of the strangest and most haunting discoveries in Eastern Europe. What they unearthed was not a simple grave, but a throne of death, and within it lay a skull fused with gold. Not a mask laid upon a face, but a face that had become gold itself. The find was made near Shipka, in what is now Bulgaria, once the heart of ancient Thrace, a land older than the Greek polis and feared by even the mightiest kings. Here, long before the rise of Rome, the Thracians buried their dead with treasures and rituals meant to secure immortality. But this burial was unlike anything ever seen. When the soil was brushed away, the archaeologist revealed a human skull, its features still eerily recognizable, but covered in a thin layer of gold that had somehow fused to the bone. The eyes, nose, and mouth were perfectly preserved beneath the metal, as though the man's face had been captured in the instant between life and eternity. At first, the experts thought it was a funerary mask, a common custom in ancient burial rites, seen from Egypt to Mycenae. But this was different. This wasn't a mask placed over the skull, it was part of it. The gold had bonded to the bone, following every contour, every detail, every ridge and fracture. It wasn't art, it was transformation. Who was this man? Among the artifacts buried beside him were weapons, pottery, jewelry, and the remains of horses, sacrificed, it seemed, to accompany their master into the next world. Symbols of power surrounded him, a silver rhyton shaped like a lion, an iron sword of ceremonial make, and fragments of a crown embedded with lapis and turquoise. The Thracians believed their kings did not die, they transcended, ascending into the realm of gods and heroes. Could this gold-faced man have been one of them? As the excavation continued, traces of an ancient ritual emerged. The burial pit showed evidence of fire, charred earth, melted resin, and faint residue of what appeared to be tree sap were discovered near the head. Forensic specialists suggested that the gold plating might have been applied using heat, possibly poured as liquid or pressed into the skin while the body was still warm. It was a horrifying, fascinating possibility that the transformation from flesh to gold was not symbolic but physical. The Thracians believed in the divine power of metals. Gold, in their mythology, was the essence of the sun, eternal, uncorruptible, the substance of immortality itself. For them, gold was not wealth, it was divinity. To cover a face in gold was to preserve the soul in its purest form, to bind the spirit to the eternal light of the heavens. This ritual, then, might have been more than a burial, it was apotheosis, the act of turning man into God. When researchers analyzed the skull under magnification, they found minute traces of plant resin between the gold and the bone, possibly a natural adhesive used to bind the metal. But what unsettled everyone was how seamlessly the gold had integrated with the bone over time. It was as if the material had chosen to stay, merging with the very identity of the man it covered. Thousands of years later, the gold still held its gleam, while the skull beneath it had darkened, brittle and fragile yet intact. The man's face, immortalized through alchemy. Legends from Thrace speak of kings who wore masks of gold during sacred rites, rulers who believed they could ascend into the afterlife as radiant beings. In one fragment of ancient text, a Thracian priest writes, "He who bears the sun upon his face shall never fade into shadow." Perhaps this man was one of those, a king, a priest, or a warrior, chosen to embody that divine light forever. But there's another, darker theory. Some scholars suggest that the ritual may not have been voluntary. The man's skull bore a fine crack near the temple, a blow from a blunt object. The wound had not healed, meaning it occurred at, or just before death. Was he killed as part of a ritual, a sacrifice made to ensure fertility, victory, or divine favor? And was the gold plating a way of sealing his spirit, trapping it between worlds? The tomb was sealed with stone slabs and covered with layers of earth and clay, creating a mound that looked like a small hill from above. These burial mounds, called tumuli, dot the Thracian countryside like ancient sentinels. Many remain unexcavated, silent, waiting. Each may hold its own gold-faced king, preserved in the earth's cold embrace. As the archaeologists catalogued every artifact, one thing became clear. This burial was not a random act. It was deliberate, reverent, and deeply symbolic. The positioning of the body, the objects around it, even the direction it faced, all pointed toward ritual alignment with the sunrise. In Thracian belief, dawn was rebirth, the moment the soul crossed from darkness into eternal light. So the man with the golden face was laid to rest facing east, toward the first light of every new day. The gold-plated skull was later placed in a temperature-controlled case in Sofia's National Museum of History. Visitors often describe a strange feeling when they look at it, not fear, but awe. The thin layer of gold still catches the light like living skin, the faint impression of a smile frozen on lips that have not moved in 2,500 years. It's as though the face looks back, aware, remembering something we cannot. Modern metallurgists have tried to replicate the process but failed to fully reproduce it. Ancient goldsmiths worked with techniques that remain a mystery, methods lost to time. How they managed to fuse gold to bone without destroying the human remains remains one of the most perplexing questions in archaeology. Was it a funerary rite, a transformation ritual, or something even more profound, a secret act of preservation performed by priests who believed they could suspend time itself? No one knows, but the man's face endures, radiant, eternal, both human and divine. The Thracians vanished long ago, their language forgotten, their cities buried beneath centuries of silence. Yet in that golden skull, they left behind a fragment of their philosophy, that the body may perish but the light within must endure. It is a message cast not in ink or stone, but in the most incorruptible metal known to humankind. And so, deep within the vaults of history, the golden-faced man lies in stillness, neither alive nor dead, but something between, a being of flesh turned metal, of mortality turned myth. His silent gleam reminds us that ancient people sought not just to remember their dead, but to make them eternal. Somewhere in that transformation between bone and gold lies the secret that every civilization has chased since the dawn of time: how to defeat decay, how to defy oblivion, how to shine forever. The idol found in a meteor crater. Beneath the endless sky of Argentina's Campo del Cielo, the field of heaven, lies a scar on the earth so deep it could have been made by the gods themselves. Over 4,000 years ago, a cluster of iron meteors tore through the atmosphere and smashed into the plains, scattering molten metal and shock-fused stone across hundreds of miles. For centuries, locals told stories of fire raining from the heavens, a divine punishment, or perhaps a message. But no one could have predicted what modern archaeologists would find buried within one of those ancient craters. Inside a pit lined with magnetized rock and fused glass, researchers uncovered something impossible: an idol, carved from meteoritic iron itself. A humanoid figure, only 2 feet tall, but unmistakably deliberate. Its surface bore strange geometric engravings, circles intersecting with spirals, lines connecting to celestial points, and an elongated head, unlike any known human sculpture from the region. What's more, its metal composition matched fragments of the Campo del Cielo meteorite, suggesting it was forged, somehow, from the same celestial debris that had fallen there millennia earlier. But here's the mystery. Metallurgical dating revealed that the idol had been shaped nearly 1,000 years before the earliest known evidence of metalworking in South America. To the ancient world, this kind of iron, known as sky metal, was sacred. It came from the heavens, untouchable by normal means. So how did a civilization, supposedly still in the Stone Age, manage to sculpt an object out of material harder than any tool they possessed? The idol was found positioned upright, as if intentionally placed to face the crater's center. Around it were fragments of charred bone, bits of obsidian, and a circular arrangement of stones that appeared to mimic a solar calendar. Radiocarbon tests dated the site to around 2000 BCE, a time when no recorded culture in the region had any tradition of ironwork. The indigenous oral histories, however, tell of visitors from the sky, beings of fire and noise, who gave the gift of heaven's skin. Could this idol have been their offering? A symbolic representation of the meteor's impact, or of something else entirely? As archaeologists examined the idol more closely, they discovered something even stranger. Embedded within one of its grooves was a microscopic sliver of quartz, and when analyzed under polarized light, it showed signs of shock lamellae, meaning it had been struck by extreme pressure, possibly during the original meteor impact itself. This suggested that part of the material was shaped before the impact, or perhaps impossibly from within it. The engravings told their own story. The circular motifs appeared to map celestial positions, a crude but accurate depiction of the Pleiades and Orion's belt, two constellations often associated with agricultural calendars and ancient creation myths. Yet one pattern didn't match any known star cluster visible from Earth, at least, not from this hemisphere. Some astronomers proposed that the configuration represented the night sky as seen from a different latitude, or perhaps a different epoch. In local legend, the iron god of the sky pit was said to sing when the storms came. Interestingly, when the idol was placed near high-frequency magnetic fields, it emitted faint vibrations, almost like a hum. Scientists theorized this was due to the natural magnetism of the meteorite, interacting with surrounding minerals. But to those who first unearthed it, the sound felt like something else, a pulse from another world, echoing through time. Later excavations revealed additional fragments of meteorite iron scattered around the idol's burial chamber, some crudely hammered, others melted into shapes resembling discs or rings. It appeared that whoever crafted the idol had attempted to reproduce celestial forms, or perhaps to bind them. The soil contained traces of hematite powder, used in ancient rituals symbolizing life and blood. It was as if they were performing a rite to connect heaven and earth, using the literal flesh of the sky. What makes the mystery deeper is that similar sky idols have since been found thousands of miles away from Siberia to Egypt, all carved from meteoritic iron, all older than conventional metalworking. Some archaeologists now suspect that humanity's first contact with iron wasn't through mining but through impact. Meteors, sudden, terrifying gifts from the heavens, may have been the spark that led humans to see the cosmos not just as a distant realm, but as a place that could touch them directly. So what was the idol of Campo del Cielo? A ceremonial artifact forged from awe and superstition? Or evidence that early humans understood more about the heavens than we give them credit for? Maybe both. Because standing there within that ancient crater, surrounded by melted stone and iron from the stars, one can't help but feel the connection between earth and sky, myth and science, fear and creation, and perhaps that's what the idol truly represents, not a god that fell from the heavens, but humanity's first attempt to speak back to them. The idol found in a glacier, high in the icy peaks of Norway, where the wind moves like a whisper between the stones and glaciers breathe like sleeping giants. A discovery emerged that seemed to melt the boundaries between myth and reality. It began with a simple thaw, the kind that mountain shepherds dread, when ancient ice starts revealing things that were never meant to be seen again. A hunter searching for reindeer stumbled upon what he first thought was a twisted root emerging from the ice. But as the sun hit it just right, he realized it was metal, shaped, deliberate, and impossibly old. Archaeologists were called in, expecting perhaps a tool or a lost blade. What they found instead was an idol, a small bronze figurine, its surface polished by time and ice, its expression hauntingly human. It was no more than 20 centimeters tall, yet every detail spoke of purpose. The figure's elongated arms were raised toward the sky, and its body bore intricate markings, spirals, sunbursts, and geometric patterns unseen in any known Scandinavian culture of its time. But what truly baffled researchers was where it had been found, embedded within glacial ice that hadn't melted for over 3,000 years. The idol's preservation was miraculous. The freezing conditions had sealed it like a time capsule. When the team gently thawed the surrounding ice, they discovered fragments of wooden poles and traces of woven fabric around it, possibly part of a ceremonial structure or offering. Radiocarbon dating of the wood placed it at around 1500 BCE, deep in the Nordic Bronze Age, a period known for its mysterious sun cults, ritual sacrifices, and elaborate burial traditions. But no one had ever found anything like this, a human-like idol trapped in the eternal frost, staring skyward as though in prayer. As the news spread, scholars began to speculate. Was this a votive offering, something left for the gods of the mountain, the spirits of the ice, or perhaps the sun itself. Many ancient Nordic myths speak of the frozen watchers, figures said to guard the passages between worlds. Could this idol have been one of them? And why was it buried not in earth or stone, but in ice? Upon closer analysis, the idol's bronze was found to contain traces of tin and copper sourced from distant regions, some as far away as Central Europe. This meant that whoever made it had access to long-distance trade networks, and more importantly, to metallurgical knowledge far beyond what was expected in that remote northern landscape. The craftsmanship was astonishing. Smooth lines, symmetrical features, and intentional polish marks, suggesting tools of precision. But the most puzzling discovery lay hidden in the metal's microscopic surface. Tiny crystals of volcanic glass fused into its bronze, evidence that the metal had been melted at temperatures higher than any known Bronze Age furnace in the region. How had such heat been achieved? Some theorists proposed that the idol's metal may have been recycled from an earlier meteor fragment, just like the celestial iron idols found elsewhere in the world. Others believed it was symbolic, that the craftsmen sought to trap the fire of the sky inside a body of bronze, as an offering to appease whatever deities ruled the mountains. The position in which it was found offered more clues. The idol had been buried upright, facing a glacial fissure that descended deep into the ice. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what looked like a small cavity below, possibly a ritual pit or a natural ice cavern. Inside, remnants of animal bones, amber beads, and broken bronze ornaments were discovered, all arranged in circular patterns. The researchers realized this was no random loss. It was a deliberate burial. Someone, or perhaps a whole group, had climbed to this desolate place thousands of years ago, carrying an object of immense significance and placed it within the glacier as a sacred offering. But what were they offering to? Ancient Norse myth, though recorded much later, speaks of beings known as the Jotnar, primal giants of frost and fire who predated even the gods. Some anthropologists believe these myths may echo the memory of ancient nature cults, people who worshipped the raw forces of the world, the ice, the storm, the volcano. The idol's posture, hands raised, head tilted back, could represent surrender or reverence to those powers. When infrared scans were performed on the idol, faint patterns invisible to the eye emerged, traces of pigment embedded within tiny cracks. It appeared the figurine had once been painted, red ochre across the face and chest, black lines along the arms. Red for life, black for death. The two extremes that ancient cultures often used to symbolize balance. Some experts now believe the idol represented a mediator between the living and the world beneath the ice, a being who could carry prayers to the realm of the dead, or to the elemental gods that dwelled within the mountain. Even more fascinating were the small holes drilled along the idol's base, suggesting it was once mounted, perhaps atop a staff, or within a ritual display. Imagine it, thousands of years ago, firelight flickering across its bronze face, shadows dancing on snow-covered stone, as the tribe performed rites to ensure safe passage through a winter that might never end. The air cold enough to burn the lungs, the sound of drums echoing across the frozen valley, and in the center of it all, the idol, gleaming like a fragment of sun trapped in metal. Yet one mystery refuses to fade. Embedded in the idol's chest was a single, perfectly spherical bead made of rock crystal. When examined under magnification, it revealed microscopic striations, the kind produced by polishing with sand and leather, a technique unknown in that period. And when light passed through it, it focused into a single bright point, as if the maker had intended it to channel sunlight directly into the heart of the idol. Was this an ancient attempt at capturing the light of the sun, a ritual meant to hold warmth within the freezing peaks? Or could it have symbolized something deeper, the eternal life of the spirit, frozen in time, yet never extinguished? Whatever its purpose, the idol's survival through millennia of ice and silence is a miracle in itself. Today the artifact rests in a climate-controlled case in Oslo, its bronze surface still gleaming faintly, as if remembering the glacier that held it for 3,000 years. Scientists continue to study it, but even now no one fully understands why it was made, or who left it there. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be understood, only found. Because some discoveries aren't messages from the past, they're echoes. Reminders that long before we mapped the stars or split the atom, humans already sought to touch the divine, not with words but with their hands, shaping gods from the bones of the earth and the breath of the sky. The idol found in a whale skeleton. On the desolate northern coast of Alaska, where the horizon melts into ice and the air hums with the low growl of the Arctic wind, an excavation team made a discovery that would blur the line between death and devotion, between human craftsmanship and the vast, unknowable will of nature itself. It began in the summer thaw, when melting permafrost revealed the ribcage of a massive bowhead whale. To the locals, it was nothing unusual. The Arctic occasionally gives back what it once claimed. But this whale was different. Its skeleton wasn't resting where it fell. It had been arranged. When archaeologists began to dig, They found the bones aligned in a precise semicircular pattern, almost like the foundation of a temple. At the very center of that ancient whale's ribcage, sheltered beneath what had once been its heart cavity, was something no one could have predicted, a carved idol. It stood only 25 centimeters tall, carved from whale ivory, polished to a soft sheen. The idol's face was featureless, except for deep hollow eyes, and a line etched down its center, as if it was meant to divide the living from the dead. Its arms were folded across its chest, its posture still and solemn, and at its base were offerings, fragments of bone, pieces of coral, and beads made from walrus tusk. Whoever placed it there had done so with reverence. Carbon dating placed the burial at nearly 1200 BCE, long before recorded Inupiat history. But even more striking was how the whale had been moved. The bones showed signs of deliberate placement, smoothed by tools rather than time. Entire vertebrae were stacked like stepping stones, leading toward the idol's resting place, forming a pathway that pointed directly toward the sea. It wasn't just a burial, it was a monument. To the people of the far north, the whale is more than a creature, it's a god, a guardian, and a source of life. Every part of it is sacred, the flesh for food, the oil for warmth, the bone for shelter. But this discovery revealed something deeper, something spiritual, a ritual that united the human and the animal in one shared grave. The idol within the whale's chest seemed to represent a spirit crossing worlds, man and beast, hunter and hunted, life and afterlife. As the archaeologists examined the idol under magnification, they found fine, wave-like patterns etched into the surface, spirals and crescents that mirrored the motion of tides. Some lines were filled with black residue, later identified as ash mixed with animal fat, likely used to anoint the idol before it was placed inside the carcass. This was no casual burial, it was ceremonial, purposeful, and ancient beyond memory. One theory proposed that this ritual was performed after a great famine, a plea to the spirits of the sea to return abundance. The whale, a gift from the ocean, may have been buried as an offering in exchange for survival, but others see something even more profound. The idol as a representation of the soul of the whale itself. The people who lived in these frozen lands believed in the returning spirits, that every whale, every seal, and every creature of the deep was reborn through ritual. By placing the idol within the whale's heart, they may have believed they were giving it a vessel to come back through. Still, the artifact raised more questions than it answered. The ivory used to craft it wasn't local. Tests showed that the tusk had originated from far to the south, possibly from ancient Pacific trade routes that predate any known contact between northern and southern tribes. This suggested something astonishing, that even in this frozen isolation, there had been communication, perhaps pilgrimage, across thousands of miles of coastline. But there was one final mystery. Inside the idol's hollow eyes, researchers found traces of mineral pigments, red ochre and crushed hematite, materials typically used in funerary rites. Under low light, those pigments reflected dimly, making it appear as though the idol was glowing from within. Some of the excavation team described the eerie effect as a face looking back through time. Local elders who visited the site refused to touch it. They said such idols were listeners, that they carried the voices of the whales, the memory of the sea itself. Some even claimed that burying one within the skeleton of a whale was a way to return the spirit home. When a whale dies, they said it sings, and the people sing back. Perhaps this was that song made solid, a prayer frozen in ivory. As night fell on the Arctic camp, the sound of the wind through the whale bones created an unsettling hum, like a low note played by the earth itself. The archaeologists began to understand that what they had uncovered wasn't just an artifact, it was a place of power. The bones and the idol formed a single design, a union between two beings, human and whale, locked in a sacred pact of survival and respect. Even after the idol was removed for preservation, strange things continued to happen at the dig site. Compass needles spun erratically, and recording equipment picked up low-frequency vibrations that no one could explain. Some dismissed it as the wind. Others wondered if the ground itself remembered what had been buried there. When the idol finally reached the laboratory, further scans revealed something even more unsettling. Inside its base, invisible to the eye, was a tiny cavity, sealed with pitch. When X-rayed, it showed what appeared to be a small bone fragment, possibly from the same whale whose skeleton had entombed it. The idol wasn't just a carving, it was a reliquary, a vessel of the sea's spirit. Standing before it today, in the dim light of the Anchorage Museum, you can almost sense the presence it carries, ancient, silent, and eternal. Its surface gleams softly, as though remembering the cold pressure of the ocean, the heartbeat of the whale, the voices of the people who sang to it before lowering it into the deep. No one knows exactly who carved it, or why, but the message feels unmistakable, that life and death, man and nature, are not enemies, but bound together in cycles far older than civilization itself. And perhaps, when the ice melts again, when the seas rise as they once did, the whale will return, carrying its idol home. The bones found in a tree hollow. Deep within the rainforests of Papua New Guinea, where the air hangs heavy with mist and the trees rise like ancient pillars of an untouched world, a discovery was made that seemed to belong to a different age, a secret of the forest that refused to be forgotten. It began when a local villager, following the echoing calls of hornbills at dawn, noticed something strange inside a massive strangler fig, a hollow dark as night, and within it, a glimmer of bone. At first it seemed like the remains of an animal, perhaps a monkey or a bird caught by the roots. But as light broke through the canopy and shone into the hollow, what was revealed left even seasoned anthropologists speechless. Inside the living trunk, half consumed by the tree itself, were human bones. A skeleton curled in a fetal position, its limbs drawn tight as though sleeping, its skull resting against the curved wooden wall. When word reached researchers from Port Moresby, an expedition was organized to reach the site, a remote highland region rarely visited by outsiders. The climb was grueling, the terrain nearly vertical in places, and the humidity so thick it clung to the lungs. But what awaited them in that hollow changed their understanding of burial and belief forever. The skeleton wasn't simply placed there, it had grown into the tree. The bark had sealed around the ribcage and skull over decades, fusing bone and wood into one strange, organic sculpture. The figure looked neither entirely human nor entirely natural, a being caught between two forms of life. And on the inner surface of the hollow, burned into the wood with charcoal and sap, were dozens of painted spirals, symbols resembling eyes and coiling snakes. Carbon dating revealed the bones to be over 600 years old, but local oral tradition suggested that this form of burial could be much older, a practice known to certain highland tribes, where death was not seen as an end, but a return. In their belief, trees were living gateways, bridges between the world of the living and the world of spirits. To bury one's dead within a tree was to let them live again, breathing through bark and leaf, watching from the canopy. The tribespeople told the archaeologists that such hollows were reserved for the tree walkers, elders, shamans, or warriors whose spirits were strong enough to protect the forest. When they died, they were placed within chosen trees, usually figs or banyans, whose roots reached deep into the earth and whose branches touched the sky. These trees were said to whisper, their leaves rustling even when the wind was still, as if the spirits within them spoke softly to one another. Further examination of the remains revealed something remarkable. Fragments of woven bark cloth still wrapped around the torso, decorated with red and yellow ochre pigments. In the mouth of the skull were tiny shells, a ritual practice meant to guide the soul to the afterlife. And around the neck, still intact despite the centuries, was a necklace of bird bones and polished seeds. But what startled the researchers most was what they found beneath the body. Embedded within the soil and root system were two carved wooden totems. Facing upward, their eyes aligned with the hollow above. Each was shaped like a hybrid creature, part man, part serpent, their hands outstretched as if holding the spirit in place. It became clear that this was no casual resting place. The entire tree had been prepared for the burial. To the indigenous people, such burials are not hidden from the world. They are meant to be seen, visited, and honored. But over centuries, as new trees grew and the old ones thickened, the hollows sealed, leaving the dead cradled in wood, invisible, eternal. And yet, in that sealed space, the bones remained perfectly preserved, untouched by rain or insects, guarded by the living trunk. One of the elders who guided the team spoke softly at the base of the tree, warning them not to disturb the spirit's sleep. "He hears everything," the man said, tapping the bark with the flat of his hand. "The forest remembers him. He is the forest." Despite their care, when the team began to remove a small section of bark for analysis, a strange sound echoed through the hollow, a low creaking groan that seemed almost like a sigh. The researchers paused, half from superstition, half from awe. When they returned to camp that night, they could still hear the wind moving through the canopy in rhythmic patterns, almost like breath. Back in the lab, studies showed that the tree had indeed grown around the bones while the person decomposed, absorbing trace minerals from the skeleton into its own living structure. Essentially, the dead had become part of the tree, their elements circulating through the trunk, leaves, and fruit. To the villagers, this was the ultimate transformation, the proof that life and death are merely two halves of one endless cycle. But there was more. Using ground-penetrating radar, scientists later discovered several other similar trees nearby, each with the same hollow shapes and mineral signatures. Beneath them, ancient post holes and stone rings suggested a ceremonial site, perhaps a forest necropolis, where generations of chosen individuals were buried within living trees. When asked why these traditions had faded, one elder smiled sadly. "The world stopped listening," he said. "The trees still speak, but people hear only machines now." Today, that hollowed fig still stands, the spirit tree of the highlands, its roots gripping the slope, its leaves whispering in the wind. Visitors say that if you press your ear against the trunk, you can hear faint knocking sounds, like someone gently tapping from within. Scientists call it sap expansion, the locals call it breathing. In a way, both are right, for somewhere in the merging of bone and bark, of man and nature, lies the truth that ancient people always understood, that death is not disappearance, but transformation. That every forest is in its own quiet way a living graveyard, and every gust of wind through the leaves may carry the voices of those who came before us. And perhaps when we stand among the trees and feel the weight of their silence, we are not alone at all. We are surrounded by the dead, watching, listening, and waiting, still rooted in the world they helped create. The codex found in a clay jar. In the blistering heat of the Judean desert, where wind carves through canyons of limestone and silence stretches for miles, a single sound once broke the stillness: the crash of a stone against a hollow jar. That sound, made by a wandering shepherd in 1947, would lead to one of the most extraordinary discoveries in human history. Hidden in a dark cave near the ruins of Qumran were clay jars, sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Inside them lay ancient scrolls, writings so fragile they crumbled when touched, yet powerful enough to change what we know about faith, language, and civilization itself. The shepherd, searching for a lost goat, had thrown a stone into a cave entrance and heard that hollow echo, like pottery breaking. Curiosity led him inside, his footsteps muffled by dust that hadn't been disturbed in centuries. There, under the curve of a limestone wall, stood a row of clay jars, some still sealed with wax. He broke one open. What he found inside looked like old leather, darkened, brittle, rolled tight. But these weren't scraps, they were scrolls covered in strange writing. What he didn't know then was that those scrolls, now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, were the earliest surviving versions of some of the world's most sacred texts. Written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, they contained prayers, laws, and prophecies, but also something far more mysterious: unknown hymns, calendars, and apocalyptic visions that hinted at secret sects living in the desert, waiting for the end of the world. When archaeologists arrived, the cave became a doorway to the past. As they brushed away sand and debris, they uncovered not just one jar, but 10, all carefully arranged in a semicircle, like guardians around something sacred. Many were empty, their contents taken by looters, but one, cracked down the middle, still held a sealed bundle of parchment, bound by linen and hardened resin. When it was unrolled under controlled light, its surface revealed ink still legible after 2 millennia. The script spoke of purity, ritual baths, and cosmic battles between light and darkness. The team soon realized this was not an isolated find. Nearby caves yielded hundreds more fragments, pieces of scrolls describing angels, visions, and even instructions for building temples that mirrored the heavens. Some texts were nearly identical to biblical passages, while others mentioned figures never seen in any other record. It was as if these scrolls were drafts, a window into the creation of Scripture itself. But one clay jar stood apart. It was unlike the rest, smoother, made of finer clay, and sealed with a different resin. Its lid bore markings, faint, geometric shapes resembling letters, but not from any known alphabet. Inside, instead of parchment, they found thin sheets of beaten copper, engraved with text, the so-called copper scroll. Unlike the others, it wasn't a religious manuscript. It was a treasure map. The copper's surface recorded a list of hidden caches, gold, silver, and temple vessels buried across dozens of locations. Some believe it described the lost treasures of the first temple, hidden before Jerusalem's destruction. Others think it was symbolic, a spiritual treasure, meant to guide initiates to enlightenment. But to this day, none of the listed hoards have been found. The jars themselves told another story. Their design matched pottery found in Qumran's communal quarters, evidence that the scrolls belonged to a desert sect known as the Essenes. These were men who abandoned city life to live in isolation, devoting themselves to purity, prayer, and writing. They believed the world was nearing its end, that corruption had poisoned Jerusalem, and that only through discipline and sacred knowledge could truth survive. To protect that truth, they sealed their writings in clay jars baked so dense they could outlast centuries of dryness and heat. Some scholars believe the Essenes buried them hastily when Roman legions marched on the region around 68 CE. Perhaps they never returned. Perhaps they died defending the caves. But their legacy endured, waiting in silence beneath layers of desert dust until a wandering shepherd stumbled upon it by accident. As more caves were excavated, each revealed fragments, bits of parchment torn by time, gnawed by insects, or dissolved by humidity. But when pieced together, they formed something astonishing. Over 900 manuscripts, some nearly complete. Among them, the Book of Isaiah, almost word for word identical to the modern version, proof that for thousands of years, its message had remained unchanged. Others, however, spoke of cosmic wars, the Watchers, and the Sons of Light. Stories that blurred the line between religion and myth. The more the researchers uncovered, the stranger it became. Some scrolls contained astronomical calculations far more advanced than expected for the period. Others described purification rituals tied to lunar cycles, and instructions for crafting vessels using metallic powders and salt, almost alchemical in tone. And among the fragments was one particularly mysterious text, a set of verses that seemed to describe a vessel of clay, holding the words of the sky. Was this a metaphor, or a literal description of what they had just found, a codex sealed for the future? Today, the original jars and scrolls rest in climate-controlled vaults in Jerusalem's Shrine of the Book Museum. Yet replicas of the clay jars, tall, narrow, and perfectly symmetrical, still carry an aura of mystery. Each jar was a capsule of time, protecting ideas through centuries of chaos and conquest. But one question remains unsolved. Why were they hidden here, in this specific place? Some scholars suggest Qumran was more than a monastery, perhaps an archive, or even a library of forbidden knowledge. The scroll's content suggests the Essenes believed in a cosmic duality, that light and dark, truth and deceit, were always in battle. They may have believed that their writings were weapons, spiritual tools meant to preserve truth until the world was ready to receive it again. When you walk through the caves of Qumran today, the wind whistles through the cracks like a whisper, echoing off the same limestone walls that once guarded the scrolls. The air still smells of dust and salt. The silence feels heavy, as though the desert itself remembers what was once hidden here. The shepherd who first found the jars lived to see his discovery reshape history, yet he once said something few historians quote, "When I threw that stone, I didn't just break a jar, I broke the silence of the past." And maybe that's true. For in the brittle skin of those scrolls, in every cracked letter and faded mark, the ancient world still speaks, quietly but endlessly, reminding us that words, once written, never truly die. They only wait for someone curious enough to find them again. The tomb that faced a dying star. There are tombs that face the sunrise, others that face the moon, and some that align with constellations long forgotten. But in a remote desert plain, where nothing but wind moves for miles, archaeologists uncovered something stranger, a burial that faced not the living sky, but the death of a star. It was as if whoever built it wanted the dead to watch a cosmic funeral. The discovery was made in the high plateaus of northern Sudan, a place where dunes swallow ruins overnight, and where, under clear nights, the Milky Way burns brighter than fire. A team surveying a field of stone mounds came across one that seemed different. Its entrance wasn't oriented toward the east like the others. Instead, it pointed northwest, a direction with no ritual significance in any known local tradition. At first, they thought it was simply misplaced, misaligned by ancient builders. But when they fed the coordinates into an astronomical model, something remarkable appeared. Around 3,400 years ago, the axis of that tomb pointed exactly toward the location of a supernova, a dying star that exploded into brilliance and became visible on Earth for weeks. The supernova, now known as SN 154, was recorded centuries later by Chinese astronomers, but this tomb seemed to suggest that others, far older, may have witnessed an earlier stellar death, perhaps even another star's final burst, one bright enough to cast shadows in the night. Inside the tomb, everything seemed arranged with intention. The entrance tunnel was narrow, descending through sandstone before opening into a burial chamber, shaped like an eye, the pupil being the sarcophagus at its center. Around it were small clay lamps burnt to ash long ago, and fragments of polished crystal that once caught the flicker of firelight. The walls were decorated not with images of gods or animals, but with dots, precise, carefully placed clusters of red pigment. At first they seemed random, but when researchers overlaid them on a digital star chart, the dots matched the position of constellations as they appeared thousands of years ago. The pattern above the sarcophagus was unmistakable, the outline of Scorpius, the constellation that had cradled the dying star. Whoever was buried here wasn't an ordinary person. The remains belonged to a man in his 40s, his bones thin but strong, his hands showing calluses consistent with working delicate tools. Around his neck was a necklace of meteoritic iron beads, fragments of a celestial body that had once fallen to Earth. Near his head, archaeologists found a carved stone disc, its surface etched with spirals and a radiating pattern that resembled an explosion. It was unlike anything seen in the region. Some suggested he was a priest, a watcher of the sky. Others thought he was an astronomer or shaman, part of a cult that worshipped celestial events as divine messages. Whatever his identity, one thing was clear: his tomb was built with astronomical precision, aligned not by accident but by design. When light from the setting sun enters the tomb during certain times of year, it travels through the entrance shaft and strikes a small reflective stone above the sarcophagus. The stone then redirects that light upward, illuminating the ceiling, specifically the painted cluster of Scorpius. It's as though the builders wanted the dead man's resting place to come alive under starlight. But the most haunting discovery came when researchers analyzed the sediment layers above the site. Traces of ancient ash, not from human fires, but volcanic-like particles, were detected in the same layer as the tomb's construction. These particles matched the kind of cosmic dust that can settle on Earth after a nearby supernova. That means the builders may have actually witnessed the dying star's light and the faint rain of cosmic debris that followed. Imagine what they must have seen: a new star appearing in the night, growing brighter than Venus, casting shadows across the dunes, and then slowly fading after weeks. To ancient eyes, it must have looked like a god dying in the heavens. Perhaps they built this tomb as a mirror, a memorial not only for a man, but for a cosmic event that changed their sky forever. Further inside the burial chamber, another object deepened the mystery: a small clay tablet, broken but legible. It bore markings that translated to something like the fire of heaven that returns to dust. It could be poetic, it could be literal. The text continued: "The soul follows the light that dies, to be born again when the sky burns anew." This simple phrase hinted at a belief in cosmic rebirth, that life and death were tied to the rhythm of the stars themselves. In a later excavation season, ground-penetrating radar revealed smaller graves nearby, all oriented toward the same celestial line. Some held children, others women, all buried with small shards of crystal or meteorite. It appeared to be an entire community who lived and died according to the sky's movements. Their alignment toward a dying star may have been part of a grand ritual, perhaps a belief that the light of that supernova would guide their souls beyond the world. Archaeologists began calling it the tomb that faced a dying star, but even that doesn't capture the full mystery, because when astronomers reran the data using modern software, they realized the tomb's alignment wasn't just toward where the supernova appeared. It also lined up perfectly with the point in the sky where that star collapsed into a neutron core. The builders somehow tracked not just light, but the fading trace of a dying sun, an accuracy almost impossible without advanced observation. How could they have known? No lenses, no telescopes, no written science, just the human eye, the open desert sky, and a devotion to watching the heavens. Yet they recorded what modern astronomers only confirmed thousands of years later. The man buried within, his skeleton perfectly preserved, had his face turned slightly upward toward the tunnel's light. His eyes had been sealed with two small pieces of crystal, like miniature mirrors. Under infrared light, they glimmer faintly, as if still reflecting something unseen. One archaeologist described the moment. It was like he was still looking at the stars, and perhaps he was. Even now, on certain nights of the year, if you stand at the entrance of the tomb and look along its axis, you'll see the faint glow of the Crab Nebula, the ghostly remnant of that same supernova. The dying star he once faced is still there, only now a swirl of dust and gas 6,500 light-years away. It's as if time itself has turned that death into beauty. Was it a coincidence? Or did the builders understand something deeper, that even stars must die, and in their death, new worlds are born? Maybe this tomb wasn't built to mourn the dead, but to celebrate transformation, the same cosmic cycle that burns in every atom of our own bodies, the tomb sealed with ice. In the endless silence of the Siberian tundra, where the ground itself never truly thaws, something ancient has been sleeping. A tomb entombed not in stone or earth, but in ice. For thousands of years, it lay sealed beneath layers of permafrost, so thick that even the air above seemed frozen in time. When archaeologists first stumbled upon it, they thought they had found just another burial mound, one of many scattered across the frozen plains. But as their tools cut through the frost, they realized they were standing at the doorway to a world no one had seen since the dawn of civilization. The site was discovered near the foothills of the Altai Mountains, where the permafrost runs so deep that even summer heat barely scratches its surface. Locals had long whispered of strange mounds that glowed faintly at dawn, not from light, but from hoarfrost shimmering across their smooth surfaces. When a team of researchers began excavating one of these mounds, the first thing they uncovered was not stone, but ice. Clear, solid, impenetrable. Beneath it, outlines began to appear. Wooden beams, ropes, and the faint curve of a burial chamber, trapped inside a frozen heart. They called it the tomb sealed with ice, and from the beginning it defied every expectation. The ice acted as a perfect vault, preserving not just bones and artifacts, but entire lives frozen in mid-motion. Inside the chamber, they found the remains of a noble woman, her body so well preserved that even the tattoos on her skin were visible, swirling patterns of animals and spirals winding across her arms. She had been buried with astonishing care, her hair woven into intricate braids, her garments layered with silk and felt, her coffin made from a hollowed-out larch tree carved with scenes of riders and spirits. But there was something else, something chilling in its precision. Around her coffin were 6 horses, perfectly aligned, each facing outward as though guarding her passage to another world. Their bridles were decorated with gold and antler carvings, shaped like wings. Their eyes had been sealed with small beads of amber, and their hooves painted black with ash. Every detail spoke of ritual, of meaning lost to time. The tomb's construction was equally strange. Unlike typical burials, it was not dug into the earth but built above it, a wooden chamber surrounded by stone slabs, then flooded and deliberately frozen. The builders had harnessed the permafrost itself as a wall, sealing the chamber forever in cold. Why would they do that? Was it to preserve the body, or to trap something within? When researchers melted through the final layer of ice, a wave of air rushed out, air that hadn't been breathed in nearly 2,500 years. The temperature inside dropped instantly, as though the tomb resisted intrusion. Inside, the scent was faint but distinct: resin, herbs, and something metallic. Along the walls, wooden panels were painted with faded figures, hunters chasing beasts that turned into clouds, birds with human faces, and suns wrapped in serpents. Then came the most haunting find. Near the woman's head was a small carved figurine made of mammoth ivory, a figure kneeling, mouth open, arms outstretched. The archaeologists thought it was a charm or idol, but when they lifted it from the ice, they discovered a hollow chamber inside. Within it was a drop of dark, dried liquid, blood, preserved in the cold. Under the microscope, the blood showed traces of animal and human DNA. It was a ritual mixture, perhaps a symbolic offering meant to protect or imprison the soul. Over time, the ice had kept everything intact, even the pigments of the tattoos. They depicted a procession, a woman leading a great elk through a field of stars, followed by smaller creatures spiraling downward. Some scholars think it's a map of the underworld, others see it as a story of rebirth. But the most striking pattern, two concentric circles with a dot in the center, appears over her heart. It's an ancient solar symbol, representing the journey from life into death and back again. Outside the tomb, in the surrounding ice, more mysteries appeared. When ground-penetrating radar scanned the permafrost, it revealed other chambers nearby, some empty, others still frozen solid. They seemed to form a pattern, not random, but aligned to the northern constellations. The woman's tomb sat precisely at the point corresponding to Polaris, the North Star, the eternal marker in the sky. It was as if her people had built their cemetery as a mirror of the heavens, each tomb a star, the ice their eternal night. But as the climate warmed and permafrost began to melt, something unsettling began happening. Local hunters reported hearing strange sounds from the dig site at night, cracks in the ice that echoed like whispers, low tones that rose and fell like breath. At first, scientists dismissed it as pressure changes in the melting layers, but when one of the cameras left running overnight captured a faint vibration, rhythmic, almost like a pulse, even the most rational among them went silent. In the months that followed, the team worked to document everything. They removed the body with care, sealing it in a refrigerated case for transport. But within days, the ice surrounding the chamber began collapsing. The walls melted unevenly, and the entire tomb shifted, sinking into itself. The archaeologists said it was natural thawing, but those who had seen the site before swore it looked like the ice was closing again, as though sealing itself back up. In her preserved belongings, one object stood out, a circular mirror made from polished bronze, still shining beneath a layer of frost. On its surface, faint etchings showed a reflection of two worlds, one above, one below, connected by a single vertical line. Some experts believe it represents the axis mundi, the bridge between realms, suggesting she was no ordinary noblewoman, but a spiritual intermediary, perhaps a priestess or oracle. Her burial in ice may have been symbolic, a way to keep her between worlds, neither rotting nor free, held forever in a state of suspension. It was a tomb that was also a prison, a doorway that could never open fully. The permafrost wasn't just preservation, it was containment. Even more haunting was the condition of her heart. When scanned by MRI after removal, it showed a strange mineral formation, calcium crystals that had grown into the shape of branching veins. Scientists said it was a natural process of mineralization. But to those who had seen her tattoos, the bones found in a ritual pit, beneath the burning sun of southern Mexico, where ancient cities lie half swallowed by the jungle, archaeologists unearthed a pit unlike any other. At first, they thought it was a simple offering chamber, another remnant of Mesoamerica's long-lost civilizations. But as they dug deeper, layer after layer, what emerged was something far more haunting: bones, hundreds of them, tangled, scorched, and broken in deliberate patterns, buried beneath what had once been a ball court, the heart of sacred sport and sacrifice. It was here, in this deep pit of silence and bone, that the living once met the gods, and the gods demanded victory not in play, but in blood. The discovery was made at an ancient site believed to have been a ceremonial hub over 2,000 years ago. A place where the great Mesoamerican ball game, Alamalistli, was played not for glory, but for cosmic balance. To the people who gathered here, the court was more than a field. It was the universe itself, the border between the heavens and the underworld. The bouncing of the rubber ball was the beating of the sun, the rhythm of creation, and the fate of entire worlds was said to hang on its path. When the game ended, so too did the lives of those chosen to sustain it. When the archaeologists first entered the pit, the air was thick, still heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, even after centuries. The bones were packed tightly, forming a spiraling descent, almost as if they had been arranged to mimic a vortex, a symbolic descent into the underworld. Many of the skulls bore marks of decapitation, others deep cuts along the jaw and cheekbone, suggesting ritual removal of the face. This wasn't random violence, it was ritual precision. The pit had been a sacrificial repository, a place where death was orchestrated with purpose. The remains told a story in fragments. Men in their 20s, their leg bones strong and worn, the bodies of athletes. Women with polished teeth and intricate bone ornaments, priestesses, or perhaps the attendants of gods. And children, their bones smaller, fragile, marked by fire. Across their skulls were traces of red pigment, cinnabar, the same mineral used in temple paintings to symbolize blood. These people were not victims in the modern sense. They were offerings, chosen and prepared for a sacred act that bound life and death together. As the excavation continued, they uncovered artifacts woven among the bones, jade beads, carved obsidian blades, still sharp, fragments of polished shell, and most curious of all, a rubber ball, hardened by time, but unmistakable. It had been placed near the center of the pit, surrounded by skulls in a circular formation. Some of the skulls had holes drilled into the sides, perfectly aligned. It was as if they were arranged to watch the ball, as though even in death, they continued the game. The researchers realized they had found something extraordinary, not just a burial, but a performance, a ritual encoded in bone. Ancient texts and murals from nearby cities depict players wearing elaborate belts and headdresses, their movements symbolic, their fate sealed the moment the ball struck the final ring. In some versions it was the winners, not the losers, who were sacrificed, the chosen few who achieved the highest honor of giving their lives to keep the sun alive. To modern minds it sounds like madness, but to them it was transcendence. When the sun rose after the discovery, light poured into the open pit, illuminating the curved walls that surrounded the remains. The pattern became visible, spirals, almost like waves, carved faintly into the clay. These carvings matched ancient depictions of the cosmic serpent, the creature said to link all realms, sky, earth, and the world beneath. The pit, it seemed, was not merely a grave but a gateway, a ceremonial descent into the belly of creation. What unsettled the team most, however, was what the bones whispered in their silence. Some bore microscopic burn marks, but not from open fire. Instead they seemed flash-heated, as if subjected to a sudden burst of intense energy. Scans revealed residues of resin and charred sap along the pit's inner edges. One theory emerged. The rituals involved setting fire to offerings soaked in liquid sap from the copal tree, the sacred incense of the gods. When lit, it released a thick, sweet smoke that rose like a bridge between worlds. Beneath that haze, chants would have filled the air, drums echoing through the court, the sound of rubber against stone carrying through the night. And then, the silence. The moment after sacrifice, when only the jungle spoke. The bones in the lower levels were older, darker, more worn. Some were intentionally painted, blackened, wrapped in woven mats, and reburied centuries after their original deaths. The same pit had been reopened and reused across generations, as though each new ceremony was meant to awaken the ones before. One carving found near the base showed a man descending into the earth while another ascended above him, both joined by a rope of twisted serpents. It's a chilling depiction of reciprocity, the living feeding the dead, and the dead feeding the gods. As the excavation neared completion, one last chamber was found beneath the main pit, a narrow tunnel carved by hand, leading toward the base of the ball court itself. Inside, the archaeologists found a single skeleton sitting upright, its hands pressed together, as if in prayer. Its skull bore a perfectly circular hole, and in that hole rested a small sphere of jade. The symbolism was unmistakable. The ball had become the soul, the eternal motion of life reborn in stone. The deeper the scientists studied the site, the clearer it became that this ritual pit wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a vast belief system that spanned empires. Across Mesoamerica, from the Olmecs to the Maya to the Aztecs, the same symbols appeared: serpents, suns, and the eternal game. The ball court wasn't just entertainment, it was a reenactment of the cosmic battle between light and darkness, day and night, the gods of life and the underworld. Every bounce, every throw, was an act of devotion. Every drop of blood spilt was the price of balance. Modern visitors who stand among the ruins often speak of an eerie stillness. The air seems heavier near the old court. Sound behaves strangely. Words echo longer, almost like whispers returning from below. Some locals refuse to go near it after sunset. They say you can hear the faint rhythm of a ball being struck, again and again, echoing from the earth, a game that never truly ended. When the bones were transferred to a museum for study, something strange occurred. The remains, kept in temperature-controlled storage, began developing condensation at night, though the air was dry. The moisture appeared only around the skulls that had been coated in cinnabar, forming a faint mist that vanished by dawn. Scientists called it a humidity reaction. The curators called it memory. Each bone, each tool, each mark in that pit tells a story, not of savagery, but of faith. These were people who believed that by offering themselves they were holding the cosmos together. Their deaths were not ends, but renewals. The pit was a seed planted in the soil of time, and from it, life was meant to bloom again, and so, beneath the vines and ruins, under the slow crush of centuries, the bones still rest, their spiral unbroken, their purpose unforgotten. The ritual pit stands as a reminder that civilization's beauty and the codex found in a burned temple. In the year 79 AD, when Mount Vesuvius erupted with unimaginable fury, it was not only the city of Pompeii that vanished beneath the firestorm. Far to the west, upon the ancient shoreline of Herculaneum, another tragedy unfolded, one that would not be understood for almost 2 millennia. Within the ruins of a magnificent seaside villa, a library was burning. Its shelves, once filled with the wisdom of philosophers and poets, were being entombed in ash and molten rock. The flames devoured parchment and wood alike. But somehow, paradoxically, what the fire sought to destroy, it also preserved. Centuries later, as excavators tunneled through the hardened lava, they found rows of what appeared to be pieces of charcoal. The workers tossed some aside, unaware of their true nature. Only when one was broken open did the archaeologist realize what they had discovered. Tightly rolled papyrus scrolls, their surfaces blackened, yet faintly imprinted with Greek text. These were the Herculaneum papyri, the world's only surviving library from classical antiquity. It is said that the villa once belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Piso was a man of great intellect and wealth, and his estate was a sanctuary for philosophers and scholars. The scrolls within his private library were thought to contain works of Epicurean philosophy, treatises on ethics, and ancient discussions about the nature of pleasure, divinity, and the universe itself. But the eruption froze that moment of knowledge in time. When archaeologists entered the villa, nearly 1700 years later, the scene was ghostly. The rooms were perfectly preserved, as if time itself had stopped mid-motion. Frescoes still clung to the walls, mosaics shimmered faintly beneath layers of ash, and on the stone shelves of a study lay hundreds of scrolls, their outer layers charred to black glass. To touch one was to risk its destruction. They were so delicate that a breath, a tremor, even the lightest brush of a fingertip could reduce them to dust. Yet, within those fragile cylinders, lay thoughts from a world that had ceased to exist. The first attempts to open them began in the 1750s, under the direction of the Bourbon kings of Naples. Engineers and scholars constructed intricate mechanical devices, frames of brass and silk that could slowly, over the course of months, unwind a single scroll. But the process was agonizingly slow. Many scrolls shattered during unrolling. Some disintegrated halfway through. Others revealed only fragments, sentences without beginnings, arguments without conclusions. Still, even in partial form, they spoke of a civilization far more intellectually rich than anyone had imagined. Philosophers debated whether gods existed as material beings, whether the universe was infinite, and whether the pursuit of pleasure was not merely indulgence but the truest path to peace. These texts offered a glimpse into a mind that sought harmony between reason and the divine, a world where faith and philosophy were one, and yet there were scrolls that refused to yield. Entire stacks remained unopened, their secrets sealed behind layers of carbon. For centuries, scholars gazed upon them helplessly, aware that within them might lie unknown works by Aristotle, Sophocles, or lost histories of Rome itself. Then in the 21st century, a miracle occurred, not of archaeology, but of technology. Using X-ray phase contrast tomography, scientists began scanning the scrolls at microscopic resolution. By detecting the subtle differences between the ink and the papyrus, they were able to read words without physically touching the object. Artificial intelligence then helped reconstruct letters, lines, and eventually full sentences, bringing voices from antiquity back to life. In 2023, a research team managed to read entire passages from one of the unopened scrolls, revealing philosophical reflections that had not been read since the days of the Roman Republic. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, humanity was hearing a voice silenced by fire. But one artifact in particular drew intense curiosity. Among the pile of charred remains was a codex, a form of early bound book, thicker and heavier than the rest. Its outer surface bore faint traces of gold and resin, suggesting it had once been sealed within a protective cover. When scientists scanned it, they found something extraordinary. Beneath the surface text, another faint layer of writing emerged, invisible to the naked eye. It was a palimpsest, a manuscript written over an older one. This discovery raised a question that still haunts historians. What was the original text? Some scholars speculate it could be a lost dialogue of Aristotle. Others believe it might contain fragments of Roman astronomical tables or records of rituals performed in honor of dying gods. Whatever its contents, it remains unreadable even now, its letters buried within the layered ashes of time. The paradox is breathtaking. The same eruption that obliterated cities also preserved one of the greatest libraries ever assembled. Fire had become both destroyer and guardian. The scrolls are neither alive nor dead. They exist in a suspended state, forever between the two. Even today, beneath the modern town of Ercolano, thousands of scrolls remain untouched, sealed within chambers of volcanic rock. Tunnels lead to them, but the air is poisonous, and the slightest vibration could cause collapse. They are there, waiting, silent, unread. Each time researchers illuminate a new fragment, it feels like opening a window into a lost world. A philosopher speaks again. A poet whispers a forgotten line. A scientist explains the heavens as he once saw them. The codex of the burned temple is more than an artifact. It is a dialogue between the living and the dead, between knowledge and oblivion. It reminds us that every discovery is also a resurrection, that wisdom can survive even when empires turn to dust. The fire of Vesuvius consumed everything it touched, yet beneath that fury it left behind a gift, a memory of the mind itself. And so, deep within the ruins, beyond reach of air and light, the codex endures. It waits in the darkness, whispering across the centuries, holding the final words of a civilization that believed thought could outlast death. For as long as the flames burned, the words lived, and even now, long after the embers have turned cold, the library still breathes, suspended forever in silence and ash. The mirror found in a burial cave. Deep beneath the mist-wrapped forests of Japan, where the roots of ancient cedars twist like veins through the stone, there lies a cave few have dared to enter. It is not large, nor grand, but to those who have stood in its silence, it feels alive. Its air is heavy with centuries of breath, the breath of the dead, the buried and the forgotten. This was no ordinary tomb. It was a chamber of reflection, literally. For inside this burial cave, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary, a perfectly polished obsidian mirror, placed beside the skeletal remains of a noble whose name has long been lost to time. It gleamed black as midnight when first uncovered, but under the dim light of a lantern, it shimmered faintly, reflecting not the face of the living, but something deeper, like staring into the memory of the earth itself. When Japanese archaeologists unearthed the site in the early 1900s, they believed at first it was simply another Kofun-era burial, one of many that dotted the hillsides. But as they brushed away the centuries of dust, the mirror emerged, resting on a flat stone altar beside the skull. Its surface was so polished it could still reflect light, even after more than 1,000 years underground. It was carved from volcanic glass, obsidian, a material revered since prehistory for its otherworldly beauty and its connection to the underworld. In ancient Japan, mirrors were not mere objects of vanity or ceremony. They were considered portals between realms, between life and death, between the seen and the unseen. To gaze into one was to look into your soul, to glimpse the spirits that lingered just beyond the veil. And so, this obsidian mirror, buried within the chest cavity of a noble's corpse, was not placed for decoration. It was meant to guide, to reflect the soul's final image as it departed this world. As researchers examined it, they noticed something strange. Unlike typical bronze mirrors from the Kofun and Yayoi periods, this one had no engravings of dragons, flowers, or sacred patterns. Its surface was perfectly smooth, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been melted and reformed by some ancient process. Modern tests later revealed the mirror was made from obsidian, not native to the surrounding area, but from Kyushu's volcanic fields, hundreds of kilometers away. This suggested that the mirror had been traded, carried, or even gifted from a powerful religious site far to the south. But the cave itself told another story. Along the walls, faint carvings were discovered, spirals, eyes, and figures that appeared half human, half bird. Their wings outstretched, their faces hollow. They looked less like gods, and more like shadows. Archaeologists speculated that the cave had once been used for Shinto funerary rituals long before formal temples existed, a place where priests would descend into the earth to speak to the spirits beneath. In this dim underworld of stone and silence, the mirror was the only light. For centuries, the Japanese considered mirrors sacred because they symbolized truth. They reflected not the world as one wished to see it, but as it truly was. The legendary Yata no Kagami, one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan, was said to embody this very idea. It represented honesty, wisdom, and the divine clarity of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. When she hid in a cave, plunging the world into darkness, it was a mirror that lured her back, reflecting her own light back at her, showing her that she was the source of illumination itself. Perhaps then, this burial mirror carried the same purpose, to help the soul find its way back to the divine light after death. When scientists cleaned the artifact using non-invasive methods, they discovered faint traces of cinnabar pigment along its edges, a red mineral long associated with blood, immortality, and the afterlife. It was often used in ancient burials to feed the spirit and preserve the body. This connection to both death and eternity deepened the mystery. Whoever had been buried here was not an ordinary noble. He was someone who commanded ritual reverence, perhaps a shaman king, a figure who bridged the mortal and the spiritual. And yet there was something else. The mirror seemed deliberately cracked across the center, not by time or pressure, but by intent. The break was clean, controlled, and ancient. Some archaeologists proposed that it was ritually broken before burial, a common practice across many early cultures. Breaking an object that held spiritual power released its essence, allowing it to travel with the soul into the next realm. But others speculated something darker, that it was sealed, a reflection deliberately shattered to prevent whatever it held from escaping. In 2011, researchers used 3D laser scanning to study microscopic tool marks on the mirror's edge. They found signs that the surface had been worked by an instrument sharper than any bronze blade of its era. The striations suggested a level of craftsmanship impossible without advanced tools or techniques, perhaps from a lost method or imported technology from mainland Asia. The mirror's origins deepened when chemical tests showed traces of foreign isotopes, implying that it might not have been made in Japan at all. Similar obsidian mirrors had been found in northern China and Korea, associated with burial rituals dedicated to the mirror gods, deities who watched over the boundary between the living and the dead. So how did such an artifact find its way into a remote burial cave in Japan? The answer may lie in the sea. During the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, maritime trade between the Korean peninsula, the Japanese archipelago, and mainland China was thriving. Goods and beliefs flowed freely across these waters. Perhaps a priest or emissary carried this mirror across the waves, offering it as a divine gift. Or perhaps it was a relic of exile, the possession of a ruler who had fled his homeland, carrying the sacred object with him into hiding. When spiritual artifacts crossed cultures, they often changed meaning. What began as a symbol of the sun might become a vessel of darkness, and so in this cave, the mirror could have transformed from a divine tool into a guardian of the dead. One night, under controlled light, researchers decided to illuminate the mirror at a shallow angle to capture its microscopic surface contours. What appeared in the scan stunned them. Hidden within the surface, faintly etched by hand, were 3 concentric circles, each containing an inner spiral. These were not random. They matched symbols carved into prehistoric Jomon stones found across Japan, marks associated with rebirth, vision, and spiritual descent. It was as though the mirror itself was a map, a guide for the soul to travel through the layers of existence. The cave's acoustics amplified even the smallest whisper. Every sound bounced and returned, creating echoes that seemed almost intentional, like the chamber had been designed for ritual chanting. Standing inside, one could almost hear voices responding from the darkness, not from ghosts but from time itself. The obsidian mirror was eventually moved to a preservation facility, where it remains under controlled humidity and light. But its legend continues to grow. Monks from nearby temples still tell of the cave that holds reflections of the dead, that if one gazes too long into the mirror, they do not see themselves, but the one who owned it first. Even now, no one knows whose face was last reflected upon its surface. Was it a king, a priest, or perhaps a spirit that never left? What is certain is this: the mirror is more than an object, it is a threshold. A reminder that every reflection carries both the living and the dead within it. That light can reveal, but it can also conceal. And deep beneath the mountains of Japan, where the cave still breathes and the shadows still shift, it is said that when the moon is full and the wind is still, the black stone glows faintly once more, as if waiting for another soul to meet its gaze. Because sometimes, the past doesn't need to speak, it only needs to look back.